Chapter 164. In my anger, I even wanted to kill him. I threw away the chopsticks and said to my dad, "I'm going to find old scoundrel Joe now." After saying that, I started to walk out. My mom probably saw that my expression wasn't right, so she quickly came up and pulled me back and anxiously persuaded me, "Sanbozi, we don't dare to cause trouble, although your old lie's actions weren't right. He didn't break the law, we won't be in the right if we cause trouble, even if we bring it to the Public Security Bureau, they won't give us any face." My dad also stood up and sighed. The plot of land for our ancestral grave belongs to Suyufu's family. Old scoundrel Joe paid, but Suyufu didn't say anything. There's nothing we can do. My parents had the mindset of a typical commoner. They worried too much, but I didn't worry about it. The law was the law, and the reason was the reason. My family was in the right, so I didn't care. If I was pushed too far, and I wasn't a good person, I could definitely make old scoundrel Joe's entire family die without anyone finding out. However, my parents' insistence made me stop and sit back down. After eating a few more mouthfuls of rice, I calmed down, and my thoughts weren't as extreme as I thought. Old scoundrel Joe was in the wrong, but he didn't deserve death. Killing people was a bit too much, and it wasn't like the country didn't have a department that specialized in metaphysics. If we really made things too big, someone would come looking for us sooner or later. At this time, the joyous atmosphere at the dining table was long gone. My dad and I were silent. My mom kept trying to persuade us, but as she spoke, she also started to sigh. After we finished eating, the sky turned dark. I wanted to go to the graveyard to see the situation, but my dad didn't agree. He told me to rest first and go with me the next morning. No matter how high my cultivation realm was, I couldn't ignore my dad's words. I could only agree and go back to my room to sleep. The next morning, after eating breakfast, my dad put on a military coat and took me to the graveyard. I didn't know how many times I've been to the ancestral grave since I was young, but I never paid attention to feng shui. It wasn't until this time that I took a good look. We are in a hilly area and there are no tall mountains. However, the mountain where my family's ancestral grave is located is not low. Moreover, there is an earthen wall that is more than 10 meters high next to the farmland where the ancestral grave is located. A dozen or so meters wasn't too tall, but the earthen walls were extremely thin. Leaning against the mountain ridge, it seemed very tall and thin. In feng shui, it was recorded that the dragon was solitary, tall and thin, and was known as the drum dragon. In terms of feng shui, it was considered a medium-sized tomb. Among them, the dragon had a round head and a sparkling body, which was considered an auspicious omen. Moreover, it had to be protected by the horns of the flag. The ancestors were buried here, and the descendants could be appointed as officials, which was the current provincial officials. However, my family's ancestral grave is far from being as round and clean as a mountain. Moreover, this earthen wall is relatively too tall, and is suspected of usurping the host. In this kind of drum-beating dragon landscape, it is appropriate to bury a person like my family's ancestral grave who was born alone. After understanding it, I gave a wry smile. Is it possible that my ancestors have blessed me to enter the metaphysics world? At this moment, my father pointed at Laolai Zhou's father's grave. I turned around and saw a big grave less than 5 meters behind my family's ancestral grave. There were stone tablets and statues on the grave, and there were even 2 rows of pine and cypress trees. It looked really imposing. I used the turning trigram palm to calculate the location. Laolai Zhou's grave was in the Kuan position of my family's ancestral grave. Lord Kuan's ancestral energy had been passed on to his descendant. From this situation, it seemed he was determined to take my family's ancestral fortune. Unfortunately, with my family's feng shui, what use would it be if he robbed it? In the end, Laolai Zhou was also tricked by Wang Zikan. Wang Zikan had a grudge against me, which was why he had found this chance. His purpose had nothing to do with my family's ancestral fortune. He just wanted to take revenge on me. After pondering for a while, I had an idea. After kowtowing to the ancestral grave, I didn't linger. I asked my father to go home with me. During lunch, I discussed with my father that we would go to Lao Lai Zhou's house in the afternoon. From the bottom of my heart, I thought that Lao Lai Zhou was still a member of my family. No matter what, I had to give him a chance. My dad finally nodded and agreed this time. He had already failed to negotiate with Zhou Laolai, so he decided to use me as his backbone. After lunch, I went to the small shop at the entrance of the village to buy 2 snacks and 2 bottles of wine. Then, I went with my father to Laolai Zhou's house. Laolai Zhou's house was not far from my house. It was a 3-story Western-style building with a large courtyard. Not only that, there was a large factory not far from his house. Inside the factory was the chicken farm that his family had been operating for more than 10 years. After knocking on the door, Laolai Zhou's son, Zhou Jia, opened the door. He was the same age as me, and we had been classmates from elementary school to high school. Our relationship wasn't bad back then. As soon as he opened the door and saw me and my father, his face darkened. He didn't even bother to greet us and asked, "What are you doing here?" Facing the rich people in the village, my father seemed a bit humble. He smiled at his juniors and was about to say something, but I stopped him and said, "Nothing. It's the new year, so we came here to wish Laolai Zhou a happy new year." Zhou Jia was prepared to argue with us. However, after listening to me, she swallowed the words she wanted to say. Reluctantly, she brought us through the door. We hadn't even entered the house when Laolai Zhou heard the commotion and rushed over. As soon as he saw us, he cursed. "Zhou Hedgehog, what are you doing here? I already told you, I bought the land with Su Yufu. My father is already buried in it. It's too late for you to say anything now. If you dare to ask me to dig my father up again, do you believe that I won't smash your house today?" The smile on my dad's face also froze. He opened his mouth and wanted to argue with him, but he, who had been honest his whole life, couldn't say anything as his face turned red. In the end, I said coldly, "Uncle Lai, my dad and I are here to pay our New Year's greetings to your family. What? Is your family rich, and us poor relatives can't even enter?" Laolai Zhou lowered his head and looked at the desserts and alcohol in my hands, then sneered. "Third brat, you're someone who went to university, and you still have the nerve to bring these crappy desserts in your hands? You're right, you won't even be able to get in today." I was going to give him one last chance, but it seems like I was too soft-hearted. I nodded and looked at him. "All right, we won't be going in today, but I'm going to call you Laolai Zhou one last time. There are some things that people do, and God is watching. Don't regret it when the time comes." Then, I left with my father. When we walked out of the door, I heard Laolai Zhou's arrogant voice saying something. "This brat's brain has gone stupid from studying, and I'm too happy to regret it." I didn't mind. After we left, I smiled and comforted my father for a while. Then, we returned home together. Just as we arrived at the door, my mom hurriedly came over to ask us about the situation. In the end, after saying a few words, she lowered her head and saw that we were still holding the snacks in our hand. She couldn't ask anything else and could only sigh while comforting us. That afternoon, I hid in my room and used the weasel hairbrush and the yellow talisman paper I had brought with me to make a special talisman. Then, I wandered around the village and brought back some peach and locust tree branches. After I was ready, I took advantage of the night to go to my family's ancestral grave. I used the talisman and the yin and yang peach and locust tree branches to set up an ancestral seeking formation between Laolai Zhou's grave and my family's. This kind of geomancy formation was used to search for the ancestors. Its function was similar to paternity tests nowadays. However, there was no such method in ancient times. Geomancy masters often used this kind of geomancy formation to help people find their roots. It wasn't too difficult to set up the formation. It only took me half an hour to set it up. Moreover, to speed up the formation, I had poured my Tao energy into it to increase the effect of the ancestral-seeking formation. The ancestral energy in my family's grave was triggered at a speed visible to the naked eye. Then, it moved to Laolai Zhou's father's grave. Around 1 hour later, the ancestral energy had completely covered the new grave. After 1 or 2 days of nourishment, Laolai Zhou's grave and my family's grave would become one. He wanted to take my family's fortune, so I helped him speed up the process. However, if his family's new grave could stay here for dozens of years and stabilize, it could still maintain its independence when it took away the fortune of my family's ancestral grave. However, since I had accelerated the process, Laolai Zhou's father's grave hadn't stabilized yet. While it was taking away the fortune, it was directly assimilated by my family's grave. To put it simply, this new grave was now one of my family's ancestral graves. The ancestral graves were arranged according to seniority, and there was a distance of 5 meters between the 2 graves, which was the distance of at least 1 grave. In other words, the position of Laolai Zhou's father's grave was where I would be after I died. That was why his seniority was now the same as mine. Something like seniority might sound ethereal, but there was a great mystery behind it. Since Laolai Zhou liked my family's ancestral grave that much, I would help him find his ancestral home. After that, I didn't retrieve the ancestral formation. I covered it with a thin layer of soil to strengthen the formation's effect. Then, I turned around and returned home. On the 3rd day, Laolai Zhou and his son, Zhou Jia, finally came. As soon as they entered the house, Laolai Zhou pointed at my father and scolded him. "Zhou Hedgehog, what the heck did you do? Last night, my father told me in my dream that your family had invited an expert to change the geomancy of his grave. Why did he ask me to come and apologize to you? And more than 100 chickens in my house have died these days. Did your family?" Before he could finish his sentence, he suddenly tripped on a rock and fell to the ground. Half of his face was swollen. My father stood there, dumbstruck. He couldn't get a hold of himself. Laolai Zhou was a troublemaker. After he fell, he didn't care about the pain. He got up and continued to scold me. "Damn it! Why did you put so many rocks in front of your house?" As soon as he said that, a few sparrows flew across the sky in the middle of winter. When they passed by his head, some bird droppings fell on his face. At this moment, the neighbors came to see what was going on. They couldn't help but laugh when they saw the scene. Zhou Jia stood next to them. He couldn't stand it anymore. He opened his mouth and scolded them. Then, he hurried to help Laolai Zhou get the bird droppings. However, as soon as he walked to Laolai Zhou threw the bird droppings behind him. He slapped Zhou Jia's face and smeared the bird droppings on his hand on Zhou Jia's face. The people around laughed harder. Laolai Zhou and his son stood there in a daze. They couldn't believe what had just happened. The two of them obviously felt strange at this time. They looked at each other, turned around and said some harsh words to my dad. Then, they got up and prepared to leave. However, before they could take a few steps, the father and son both bumped into the iron gate of my house. Zhou Jia even got a cut on her face. This time, the people around couldn't laugh anymore. My house's gate was wide open. Why didn't they walk through the 2-meter-wide gate? Why did they have to bump into the gate against the wall? In just a blink of an eye, people wore strange faces and started to discuss. There was only one topic. Did Laolai Zhou and his son encounter evil spirits? At this moment, I smiled. Of course, this father and son pair weren't possessed. They were just disrespectful to their ancestors. After setting up the ancestral formation, it had been several days since then. From a geomancy point of view, my father was Laolai Zhou's grandfather and Zhou Jia's great-grandfather. Now that they had insulted their ancestors, it would be strange if they weren't unlucky. Chapter 165. After Laolai Zhou and his father disappeared from my house, the neighbors vaguely understood what had happened. Lao Lai Zhou had said that my father had found someone to change the feng shui of his house. Now, everyone's expression changed when they looked at my father. Most of the villagers believed in supernatural things. Moreover, what had happened just now had happened in front of them. No one could refute it. After this incident, the villagers immediately spread the news that my father and I had found a feng shui master from the provincial capital to change the feng shui of Lao Lai Zhou's father's grave. This would make his family suffer from bad luck in the future. Because Lao Lai Zhou and his father had gone to the hospital, there were rumors that their whole family was seriously ill. They didn't seem to be able to live for long, and their whole family was going to die. After that, Lao Lai Zhou's family turned from a rich family that everyone in the village wanted to get close to. Now they had become a family of bad luck. Even during the Lunar New Year, some relatives in the village didn't dare to visit their house. Even my father muttered to himself. On the eve of the Lunar New Year, he asked me, "Third child, why do you think Lao Lai Zhou suddenly became like this?" Although he had been bullied a lot, my father still couldn't bear it. I didn't feel any pity for him. It was Lao Lai Zhou's fault. He deserved this retribution. I smiled and said to my father, "God is watching what people do. God can't stand it anymore. He wants to punish his family." My father sighed and didn't say anything. He didn't look happy either. On the 5th day of the Lunar New Year, Lao Lai Zhou and his father suddenly appeared in front of my house. This time, Wang Zikan came with them. After seeing him, I smiled. The main culprit behind this incident was that despicable Wang Zikan. I didn't have time to find him, but he came to my door. Before I could say anything, Wang Zikan angrily walked in front of me and asked, "Zhou-yi, yesterday, I went to Lao Lai Zhou's grave to see. Someone had set up a formation there. It must be your doing, right?" His attitude dumbfounded me. He had checked the formation and guessed that I was the culprit. Why was he so rude to me? Wang Zikan was just an ordinary feng shui master. After seeing the ancestral seeking talisman, he should have known that this matter was done by a dragon-seeking realm feng shui master. How could an ordinary feng shui master dare to challenge a geomaster? I sneered. "What? You can incite others to dig up my ancestral grave, but I can't retaliate?" Hearing this, Wang Zikan's face lit up with joy. He ignored my words and laughed. "So it really was you. I knew it. When your family was building a house, your feng shui attainments weren't low. Now you've actually reached the geomaster realm. However, don't think that you can do whatever you want just because you are a geomaster. There is a price to pay for doing such things." This made me even more puzzled. Previously, I was wondering if this fellow didn't know about the Earth Master Realm. But now, it seemed that he understood. Since he understood, why did he dare to ask me to pay the price in front of me? Before I could say anything else, the sound of a car engine came from the entrance. Not long after, an old man in his 50s or 60s walked in with two middle-aged men. Seeing these people, my gaze finally turned cold. The two middle-aged men had an acupoint sealing realm cultivation that was not inferior to mine. As for the old man, I could only feel the movement of Tao energy from his body, but I couldn't see his realm. This kind of situation could only occur when the other party's cultivation was higher than mine. This old man was at least a mid-level acupoint sealing realm feng shui master. No wonder Wang Zikan was so confident. He had already found a backer. Without waiting for me to understand, Wang Zikan ran in front of the old man and greeted him with a flattering expression. "Director Chen, did you have a smooth journey?" Director Chen didn't pay attention to him. He looked around and pointed at me. He asked Wang Zikan calmly, "The person you said used feng shui to harm people, is he this fellow?" Hearing that, Wang Zikan immediately nodded. He added oil to the fire and said, "It's him." For no reason, he used an ancestral seeking formation. He let the ancestral energy from his family's grave cover Lai Lai Zhou's grave in the village. This caused Lai Zhou's family to have bad luck if they were even the slightest bit disrespectful towards them. From before the new year until now, Lai Zhou's chicken farm has lost several hundred chickens. His family members have also been injured many times. Until now, they are living a life worse than death. Hearing that, Lai Zhou and his son, who were standing at the side, immediately came forward and cried. They exaggerated their experiences in the past few days. Lai Zhou, that old thing, even said that he had been diagnosed with a terminal illness. I laughed coldly in my heart. It had only been a few days. Even if he didn't eat, drink, or sleep, and stayed at home to scold my family every day, he definitely wouldn't have been diagnosed with a terminal illness. Now that he was crying so heartbroken, it must have been hard on him. After listening to their crying, Director Chen didn't say anything else. He walked to my side and looked me up and down. Then, he said in a clear voice, "You little brat, you have such a high cultivation level at such a young age. You have a bright future ahead of you. Why didn't you cultivate properly? Why did you walk the path of evil and use feng shui to harm people? Do you know that in the world of metaphysics the biggest taboo is to attack normal people? You will only destroy yourself by doing this." His words were very reasonable, but his indiscriminate attitude made me angry. I also said coldly, "Why did Director Chen only listen to one side of the story? Don't you need my explanation?" Just as I finished speaking, Director Chen became even angrier. His eyebrows furrowed and he immediately reprimanded me. "What else can you explain? The dead rule of the world of metaphysics is that you can't attack normal people. Wang Zikan already showed me the ancestral seeking array that you set up yesterday. Let me ask you, was that array set up by you?" At this moment I was really angry. I also agreed that we can't easily attack normal people, but there should be a limit. For example, the other party wanted to dig up my ancestors' graves. If I didn't do anything, should I just watch as my ancestors were humiliated? I couldn't even be bothered to explain and only nodded coldly. Suppressing my anger, I said, "Yes, I did. So what?" At this moment, Director Chen's face was also filled with anger. It's not scary to do something wrong, what's scary is to not repent. You little brat, since you don't want to admit your mistakes, then I will bring you to the Metaphysics Society today and lock you up for half a year. When you reflect on your mistakes, then I will let you out. My parents might not have understood what we had said earlier, but they understood what I had just said. They immediately panicked and rushed in front of me, shielding me behind them. With a pale face, they questioned Director Chen. "Who are you people? What right do you have to lock up my child?" Director Chen waved his hand and said, "I am the vice president of our city's Metaphysics Society, Chen Xuanda. Your child is a member of the Metaphysics Society and is also within our city's jurisdiction. I have the right to punish him. The two of you must not stop me." After saying that, he waved his hand and the two middle-aged men beside him pushed my parents to the side and rushed forward to grab me. My parents were already old and frail. After being pushed by the two of them, they immediately stumbled backwards and almost fell to the ground. Seeing this scene, I couldn't hold it in any longer. I raised my hand and used a rhino's finger seal, pointing at the two of them. My Taoist chi was extremely pure. Even if these two middle-aged men were to fight me normally, they might not be my match. At this moment they were caught off guard. One of them was directly injured by my attack and was forced to retreat, while the other dodged to the side with a pale face. After they moved out of the way, I hurried over to check on my parents' situation. At this moment, Director Chen was so angry that his face turned red. He walked forward and glared at me. With an unfriendly expression, he said, "Your name is Zhou Yi, right? Very good. Originally, I wanted to punish you before letting you join our Metaphysics Society's branch. Now, it seems that you have no remorse at all. You actually dared to arrest us. Then, don't blame me for bullying the weak." After checking that there were no major problems with my parents, I stood up and stared coldly at Director Chen. I said, "You don't have to worry about that. I am now a member of the Metaphysics Society's Shenzhen branch. Coincidentally, I am also the vice president. It's fine if you want to bully the weak, but first, you have to have the ability to do so." After saying that, I began to receive the Taoist qi. Even a clay figurine has a temper. This Chen Xuanda believed Wang Zikin's side of the story and did not differentiate between right and wrong. He even almost injured my parents. Who could endure such anger? Furthermore, he was only a vice president. His strength was only at the middle acupoint ceiling stage, which was slightly higher than mine. Previously, I had fought against Jing Gui, a person from the Ghost King realm. Why would I be afraid of this Chen Xuanda? However, who knew that after I was prepared to fight, Chen Xuanda would stand there motionlessly? He stared at me with his brows slightly furrowed, as though he was thinking about something. After a while, he muttered with a strange expression, "Shenzhen branch. Zhou. Could it be that you are that Zhou?" I was stunned, but immediately understood. After the Young Phoenix gathering, the Metaphysics Society would create a commemorative book to distribute to the various branches. This Chen Xuanda had obviously heard of my name. Without waiting for me to nod and admit it, Chen Xuanda opened his mouth again. "You must be. At such a young age, you already have a cultivation that is close to ceiling 2 acupoints. Other than the current generation's young phoenix, who else could it be? We are like a flood rushing against the temple of the Dragon King. Brother Zhou, you said that there was a misunderstanding. If there's no problem, can you tell me in detail?" Chapter 166. Although Chen Xuanda and I were both vice presidents of our respective branches, we were fundamentally different. Although I was weak, I was extremely talented and had a bright future ahead of me. On the other hand, Chen Xuanda's strength was average and he was old. It was almost impossible for him to make any progress on the path of cultivation. It was probably because of these reasons that Chen Xuanda didn't seem like a cultivator but more like an ordinary bureaucrat. I looked at him playfully. The resentment in my heart didn't disappear just because he gave in. I said coldly to him, "President Chen wants to hear it now, but I don't want to say it now." Hearing what I said, the smile on Chen Xuanda's face instantly froze. He opened his mouth and looked awkward, but he didn't know what to say. At this time, Wang Zikin jumped out again. He pointed at me and scolded, "How rude! You're just the vice president of the Shenzhen Student Selection Association. What right do you have to behave atrociously in our Taiyuan? Let me tell you, since you've committed a crime here in Taiyuan, you have to obey the jurisdiction of our Taiyuan branch." Poor Wang Zikin. Even now, he still thought that I was relying on my status as the vice president of the Shenzhen Student Selection Association. I didn't need to say anything. Chen Xuanda's face instantly burst with anger. He shouted, "Shut up!" Then, he pulled Wang Zikin back and slapped him in the face. Wang Zikin was hit silly. He stood there and covered his face, as if he didn't understand what had happened. Chen Xuanda's anger hadn't disappeared yet. He stared at Wang Zikin and said coldly, "Zhou Yi's family is poor, while Zhou Lai's family is rich. Wang Zikin, tell me honestly, did you receive any benefits from Zhou Lai to deliberately frame Zhou Yi?" Wang Zikin didn't want to say anything, but he was just an ordinary feng shui master. In front of Chen Xuanda, who was at the middle stage of the acupuncture point realm, he didn't have any room to resist. Soon, his heart completely collapsed. He opened his mouth and told everything that had happened. After he finished speaking, he slumped to the ground with a miserable look on his face. Chen Xuanda didn't pay attention to him. Instead, he turned to the 2 middle-aged men beside him and said, "You 2 go to the branch's archive room tomorrow and expel him. This kind of shameless and unjust villain doesn't deserve to stay in our branch." Hearing him say this, Wang Zikin's face became even more ashen. As a feng shui master, the title of master was meaningless. Only a member of the Metaphysics Society could be said. Now that he was expelled from the Metaphysics Society, his future was really worrying. Perhaps it was because Wang Zikan thought of the future tragedy. He threw himself in front of Chen Xuanda, crying and begging for mercy. However, Chen Xuanda's face was full of disgust and disgust. He was unwilling to say a word. He just commanded the two young men to carry Wang Zikan away and throw him outside the courtyard. After everything was settled, Chen Xuanda turned his head to look at me. A smile instantly appeared on his face as he apologized to me. "Brother Zhou, this matter has been thoroughly investigated. Our Taiyuan branch had a parasite that wrongly accused Brother Zhou. Now that Wang Zikan has been expelled from the branch, this old man also wants to apologize to Brother Zhou. I hope Brother Zhou can be magnanimous." The previous exaggerated way of handling the situation, in addition to his current humble attitude, made me stand there dumbstruck. I really didn't know what to say. Chen Xuanda didn't seem to mind. He even walked over and intimately said, "However, Brother Zhou, it can be said that we didn't get to know each other through fighting. If it wasn't for today's matter, I wouldn't have known that the world-famous young phoenix was actually from our Taiyuan branch. Although it's a bit regretful that you didn't join our Taiyuan branch, no matter what, you are still the pride of our Taiyuan branch. Today's matter was this old man's fault. I don't know if Brother Zhou would do me the honor and let this old man be the host and properly apologize to you." Having said this much, I didn't have any intentions of pursuing today's matter. However, I clearly didn't need to agree to his invitation. Just as I was about to wave my hand to decline, I frowned and suddenly thought of something. I hesitated for a moment, but in the end, I didn't directly refuse. Instead, I asked him to postpone the meeting until tomorrow. Of course, Chen Xuanda didn't refuse and hastily agreed. After exchanging some pleasantries, he hurriedly left with his people. At this time, a large group of neighbors had gathered around us. Seeing a big shot like Chen Xuanda fawning over me, their eyes were wide open. After they left, they couldn't help but discuss the matter. Earlier, the neighbors had looked at me as if I were their nephew, but now their gazes were filled with respect, making me feel inexplicably awkward. Fortunately, they didn't stand around for long and slowly dispersed. At this time, I hurried to my parents and carefully checked their bodies. After confirming that they weren't injured, I heaved a sigh of relief. I relaxed, but my parents were still worried. They asked me, "Third child, didn't you say that you were going to be a geomancer? How did you become the vice president? Also, you are a geomancer. How come you're fighting?" My parents had clearly seen me use the rhino finger seal on the two middle-aged men. Fortunately, besides geomancers at the Geomancer Master Realm and above, ordinary people couldn't see the light fingers formed by Tao energy. Otherwise, my parents would have been scared out of their wits. I grinned and didn't know how to explain. I could only tell them that it was the application of Geomancer in daily life. It wasn't a fight, just a scare. As for the vice president, it was easy to explain. I told them that those who made a living in Geomancer had to join the association. I only got the vice president position because I had a good understanding of Geomancer. I didn't have any power, it was just an honor. With this explanation, my parents finally understood. The worry in their eyes gradually disappeared and was replaced with a bit of pride. Especially my mom, she couldn't help but praise me. I knew that our family's third child would be successful no matter what he does. Look at that old man just now. He's only a vice president at his age. Our family's third child is the same as him and will become a president in the future. I felt awkward listening on the side, but I couldn't stop my parents from showing off. I could only smile foolishly. That night, old scoundrel Zhou and his son appeared in front of my house again. This time, they didn't scold me. Instead, they each carried a few boxes. From the exquisite packaging, I could tell that these weren't things that could be bought from the small store at the entrance of our village. The father and son both had bruised noses and swollen faces. After walking to the door, Zhou Jia carefully shouted under old scoundrel Zhou's command, "Are Uncle Hedgehog and brother Zhou in?" After shouting, he hadn't even taken 2 steps when he tripped on a stone slab on the ground and fell flat on his face. However, it seemed that the father and son had gotten used to it in the past 2 days, so they didn't mind it at all. Zhou Jia quickly got up and stood there with an honest look, waiting for us to appear. My dad and I walked out of the house at the same time. I looked at the father and son, my heart still cold. It wasn't that I didn't want to give them face, but they had crossed the line. We were all from the same village, so how could they do something to my family's grave? My dad sighed at this time, although he was a bit hesitant. He still said to me in the end, "Third brat, your old Uncle Lai has suffered enough this time. As long as he's willing to move the grave, then don't pursue it anymore. We're all from the same village, and we're from the same family. We shouldn't let the people in the village see us as a joke." He had the typical mindset of a farmer, and he valued the family name the most. Even if old scoundrel Zhou had done something like this, he still cared about his family. I couldn't disobey my father's order, so I nodded. I walked over and said to old scoundrel Zhou and his son, "When your family moves the grave, the strange things that happened to you won't happen again. Remember, don't do stupid things again." The 2 of them nodded. Old rascal Zhou took out a red envelope and gave it to me. It was bulging, and it looked like there was a lot of money inside. However, I didn't put it in my eyes. I turned around impatiently and went back to my room. That night, I sat on my bed and slowly circulated my Tao energy. I was thinking about meeting Chen Xuanda the next day. The reason why I had agreed to have dinner with him was because of one thing. When we were by the Yellow Spring River, Liang Tianxin had told me that he wanted to investigate the underground palace under the 28 Fiend Yellow Springs formation. He had found everyone except me and the fatty. Not only that, but he had also imprisoned their souls and refined them into Yin souls. Liang Tianxin was the Taoist master, so I couldn't snatch the souls of those people from his hands. But no matter what, the red shadow came out of that grave, and the things that happened in the underground palace had a lot to do with the red shadow. If it was related to the red shadow, it was also my business. I felt really sorry for Old He and the others. According to what had happened that year, Old He was a member of the local student selection committee. I could also find information about the people he had brought with him. Since Liang Tianxin had found those people, they must have died a horrible death. Their descendants couldn't live a good life, either. I wanted to visit them and try to make it up to them. Because of this, I had agreed to have dinner with Chen Xuanda. Otherwise, I wouldn't be able to talk to a bureaucrat like him. After thinking about it for a while, I prepared to sleep. However, right at this moment, the ghost seal on my arm suddenly released a scorching hot current, rushing through my meridians. In just a blink of an eye, I was in so much pain that I almost screamed. At the same time, my body was soaked in sweat. Chapter 167. Since I was at home, I didn't dare to scream out loud to make my parents worry. I could only endure the pain with all my might. But strangely enough, after the boiling heat circulated through my meridians, it quickly calmed down. The boiling heat turned gentle, and the sharp pain disappeared in an instant, replaced by a warm feeling. The meridians in my body felt like they were soaking in a hot spring. After the initial pain, what followed was endless enjoyment. My meridians, limbs, and bones were all warm, so comfortable that I couldn't help but moan. I laid there, feeling dizzy. I didn't know how long it took before I slowly woke up. When I woke up, I was shocked to find that the Tao Qi in my body seemed to have changed. After these few days of hard work, the Tao Qi in my heaven meridians had occupied close to 2 acupoints, reaching close to 2 acupoints. I didn't know how this progressed compared to geniuses like Han Wennan and Zhang Kunlun, but at least I had left the people of the Guangdong branch behind. I thought that this cultivation speed was fast, but I was shocked to find that the Tao Qi in my heaven meridians had occupied a total of 4 acupoints. There was even a faint glow of Tao Qi in the 5th acupoint. This was a sign that the Tao Qi had entered the 5th acupoint. Just a moment of pain and then a moment of comfort, and I actually advanced by 3 realms? He advanced directly from 2 apertures to 5 apertures? I was stunned. After a long while, I vaguely remembered the legend of the Tao Ghost Seal. I quickly looked at my left wrist. At this moment, the red ghost shadow on the Tao Ghost Seal had disappeared, and only a red ghost face was left. The yin-yang fish on its forehead was even clearer. I thought about it and understood. The Tao Ghost Seal had the power of glory of consciousness sealed in it. Since I got the Tao Ghost Seal until now, it had been close to a month, and the power of the Tao Ghost Seal had finally started to be absorbed by me. It's not that I haven't thought about this, but I've always thought that this kind of power that doesn't belong to me can't be converted too much. Even if it's the power of the glory of consciousness realm, it would be good if it could be converted into 1 aperture of Tao Qi. But I never thought that just a portion of it could actually raise my cultivation by close to 3 apertures. Anyone could tell that the essence of the Tao Ghost Seal was in the yin-yang fish pattern on the Tao Ghost's head. In other words, I've only absorbed a small part of the Tao Ghost's body, and I've already improved so much. What will happen if I absorb the Tao Ghost's head in the future? Now that I thought about it, I couldn't believe it. Could it be that the Tao Ghost trapped in this Tao Ghost Seal was a heavenly master when he was alive? But who had the ability to refine a heavenly master into a Tao Ghost? The more I thought about it, the stranger I found it. If it really was the celestial master's soul of the path, it was a waste of God's gift to refine this ghost seal. I wondered where Liang Tianxin and his son had gotten it. Of course, even though it was a pity, I was still very excited. My 5-apertured cultivation base could be considered the middle acupoint sealing realm. I wasn't inferior to Qin Xuanda, who I'd met during the day. With my current cultivation speed, perhaps I would be faster than Yi Piampian. I could reach the glory of knowledge realm in less than 3 years. It was a quiet night. The next morning, my parents went to visit their relatives while I went to the city alone. As soon as I got out of the bus station, I saw Qin Xuanda, which startled me. Although I'd contacted him on the phone and he knew when I would arrive, the bus wasn't punctual during the spring festival. I didn't know how long he had been waiting here. He was the vice president of the Metaphysics Association, but he had lowered himself to this extent. I didn't know if I should laugh or cry. However, it made sense. With Yi Piampian's talent of 3 meridians, she had become the vice president of the Metaphysics Association in just 3 years. My talent was stronger, and my future achievements were bound to be higher. If it were someone who had reached the glory of knowledge realm or higher, they wouldn't care. However, he was only at the middle acupoint sealing realm. Who knew when I would catch up to him? So, it wasn't too hard to understand why he was so careful. In fact, the moment he saw me today, Qin Xuanda's eyes widened again. Even his voice trembled as he asked me in shock, Bro, Zhou, if I'm not wrong, your cultivation was still at the early acupoint sealing realm yesterday, right? I nodded awkwardly. Qin Xuanda instantly sucked in a breath of cold air. He pointed at me and said with a trembling voice, "One night? In one night, you jumped from the early acupoint sealing realm to the middle acupoint sealing realm?" He looked as if he'd seen a ghost. His face was full of shock, and he didn't even notice that his current actions were very rude. Of course, I didn't pursue the matter, but I felt very awkward. I couldn't explain the ghost seal, so I could only let him continue to misunderstand. I shook my head and said, "It's not that exaggerated. I just happened to break through a bottleneck last night." Qin Xuanda immediately shook his head and said, "I can feel that your current strength has even surpassed mine. Even if you broke through a bottleneck last night, I've never seen anyone who can directly reach the 5th acupoint sealing realm right after breaking through the middle acupoint sealing realm. as expected of a peerless 4 meridians talent, it's actually so terrifying. He was right. After reaching the 4th acupoint sealing realm, it could already be called the middle acupoint sealing realm. Chen Xuanda was probably at this realm, and my cultivation at the 5th acupoint sealing realm had actually surpassed his. However, he was taking it for granted that it was all due to talent. I tried to change the topic and asked him where we were going to eat. In the end, he casually said a name and continued to sigh. Back then, this old man was only a half-meridian talent, and it took me 20 years to reach the middle acupoint sealing realm. But Bro Zhou, you actually surpassed this old man in just 1 month at the Young Phoenix gathering last year. This is simply. He couldn't even find a word to describe it after a long time. Just like that, for the rest of the meal, it was basically Chen Xuanda sighing and I being humble. As for Chen Xuanda and his group, the more they discussed, the more they admired me, and the more they spoke to me. In the end, when I asked him to help me look up some information about the Metaphysics Association, Chen Xuanda didn't hesitate and hurriedly nodded in agreement. However, when I saw old He Yuanshan, and the others, Chen Xuanda was stunned and didn't speak for a long time. I frowned and couldn't help but ask, "What's wrong? Is there any inconvenience?" Chen Xuanda reacted and looked a little excited. He shook his head and said to me, "It's not inconvenience, it's because Hiyuchi is my master, and He Yuanshan is my junior." This time, even I had a strange expression. This Chen Xuanda was actually old He's disciple? We looked at each other for a long time, and Chen Xuanda asked me with a puzzled expression, "Bro Zhou, why are you looking for information about my master and junior? Could it be that Bro Zhou knows my master? Old He and I didn't just know each other. Although it was Red Shadow who gave me the death scripture that allowed me to officially step onto the path of metaphysics, it was old He who truly let me see metaphysics and aroused my interest in it. The past was still vivid in my mind, and I always had the thought of paying old He a visit. Who would have thought that before I could take action, we were already separated from each other? I nodded and said in a low voice, "Grandpa, he saved my life when I was young, and we went through some things together. It's a pity that I haven't come to find him since then." Chen Xuanda didn't notice the disappointment in my tone, and said with a puzzled expression, "That's strange. I haven't heard my master mention your name all these years." I sighed. Liang Tianxin had already told me that I was no longer in old He's memories. I didn't know what rules he was talking about, but I felt sad when I thought about it. I drank the wine in front of me in one gulp, then asked, "Uncle Chen, when did something happen to Grandpa He and the others?" Chen Xuanda was flattered when he heard me call him Uncle Chen, but his face darkened when he heard what I said. He sighed and said, "It was in the spring of the year before last. At that time, my master had just retired from our Taiyuan branch. I don't know what he was researching every day, but he didn't live in the city, but in your county. At that time, I had already taken over my master's position as the vice president, and I was busy every day. I only knew that something had happened when I received a call from your county's Public Security Bureau. When I went to investigate, I found that my master and the other souls had been taken away, and only soulless corpses were left. From this method, it seems like it was done by those ghost and corpse rearing sections. But there are no such crooked people in our vicinity. After that, I secretly investigated for a long time, but until now, I still don't have the slightest clue." I nodded, but I didn't tell him about Liang Tianxin. He was a heavenly master, and if I told him about it, it would only add to Chen Xuanda's worries. I could only keep this grudge in my heart. Sooner or later, I would find Liang Tianxin and settle this grudge. After the meal, Chen Xuanda took me to the Taiyuan branch. He asked someone to find information about the others for me, while he took me to the president's office. He said that he wanted to introduce the president, Xielingyun, to me. Xielingyun looked to be about the same age as Chen Xuanda, but his cultivation base was much higher than Chen Xuanda's. He had the glory of knowledge cultivation base. Contrary to my expectation, Xielingyun didn't seem to be enthusiastic towards me at all. On the contrary, he was somewhat indifferent. After chatting with me for a while, he said that he had something to do and sent me out of the office. Although I felt that it was strange, I didn't think much of it. However, not long after that, Chen Xuanda came back with a gloomy face. He told me that the people he had sent to investigate had been refused at the door. President Xie said that he wasn't a member of the branch, so he didn't have the right to look at the members' information. What did Xielingyun mean? Although his cultivation base was at the glory of knowledge realm, he shouldn't completely disregard me, right? Ever since I revealed my 4 meridians talent, even the headquarters Yang Shilong, Dan Feng, and the others were very polite to me. He was just the president of a small Taiyuan branch. Why didn't he give me face? I really couldn't understand, so I had Chen Xuanda go and ask around. In the end, he quickly got the result. He hurriedly ran back and asked me with a grave expression, "Zhou Yi, did you cripple the arm of the Lu family's first son, Lu Zhenyang, at the Young Phoenix gathering?" So it was the Lu family. These days, the Lu family hadn't made any movements. I thought that a metaphysical family like the Lu family would care about their face and wouldn't investigate this matter. I didn't expect that I would suddenly hear the Lu family's name. Chapter 168. Before I could figure it out, Chen Xuanda persuaded me. "Zhou Yi, I think you shouldn't stay here any longer. Go back to your Shenzhen branch as soon as possible. When the Lu family really comes, you'll have something to rely on." After he said that, I smiled wryly. Although I was the vice president of the Shenzhen branch, what did I have to rely on? Not only did I not have anything to rely on, even President Su and I were half enemies. After thinking for a while, I shook my head and said, "There's no need to panic. After crippling Lu Zhenyang's arm, it wouldn't be strange for the Lu family to do anything. But after all, so much time has passed. If the Lu family wanted to take revenge, they would have come long ago. Since they could drag it until now, it proves that the Lu family still have some scruples." That was indeed what I thought, but after hearing what I said, Chen Xuanda's expression didn't change at all. Instead, he shook his head and said to me, "The Lu family is famous for being arrogant and despotic. They definitely won't let this matter go. Also, you're wrong. Although the Lu family is big, it has always been difficult for the metaphysics world to interfere with ordinary people's matters. The Lu family didn't do anything during this period of time, but it might not be because they have scruples. And?" I frowned and quickly thought about it. After the Young Phoenix gathering, the Lu family would have scruples in the beginning. After all, I was the Young Phoenix of this generation. They had to give face to the Metaphysics Union, so it was impossible for the Lu family to take action immediately. After that, I had a conflict with the people of the ghost-raising sect, and was chased by Liang Tianxin. The Lu family couldn't find me. Calculating the time, if the Lu family wanted to take revenge, it seemed that this period of time was really suitable. My heart sank when I thought of this. It wasn't that I regretted it. When I was in the dragon-seeking realm to deal with Lu Zhenyang, who was in the acupuncture point realm, I would have died if I wasn't careful. I couldn't have held back. No matter what the result was, it was much better than me dying in Lu Zhenyang's hands. I wasn't too afraid. After all, I had the experience of being chased by Liang Tianxin. No matter how strong the Lu family was, it wasn't enough to make me afraid. The only thing I was worried about was that I was at home. If the Lu family came to take revenge, would it implicate my family? Instantly my face paled. I hastily bid farewell to Chen Xuanda and prepared to leave this place. But then, I suddenly thought of something. Since the Lu family had found this place, it would be easy for them to find my family. If I ran away, would they take my family as hostages? If it was someone like Han Wennan, I definitely wouldn't be worried about such a situation. However, I didn't dare to trust Lu Zhenyang's character. After forcing myself to calm down, I called out to Chen Xuanda again and said to him, "Uncle Chen, from President Xie's attitude, this matter was most likely leaked to the Liu family by him. If the Liu family comes looking for us, they will most likely find President Xie first. If it's possible, please help keep an eye on President Xie these few days. Once the Liu family appears, immediately call me." The current relationship between Chen Xuanda and me was no longer the same as before, but after I said that, he pondered for a moment before saying to me with a wry smile, "I can help you with this matter, but that's all I can help you with. It's not that I'm not loyal, but after Master and my juniors left, I'm the only one left in the older generation in our branch. The group of juniors are all counting on me. I can't guarantee that Master's teachings will be passed down, but I have to guarantee that I will raise this group of children smoothly. Zhou Yi, I'm really sorry." After hearing his words, my opinion of him had completely changed. After old He Yuanshan and the others were killed by Liang Tianxin, there were only some youngsters of the third generation left in their branch besides him. This included He Yuanshan's only son and old He's only grandson. With such a mission on his shoulders, it was no wonder that Chen Xuanda had such a personality. I nodded and said to him gratefully, "Uncle Chen, it's already very good of you to be able to help me up to this point. In addition, I have some money with me. We, the people of the metaphysics world, start cultivating from a young age, so we can't lack money. Take it and give it to the children." In addition, there were other people involved in that matter. If it's possible, I'd like to ask Uncle Chen to take care of the descendants of those people. After saying that, I handed over a bank card that I had prepared earlier. This card contained the 3 million RMB that Wang Yongjun had previously given me. Chen Xuanda was stunned and said with a frown, "It's only right to take care of the descendants of those people, but this matter doesn't have much to do with you. Why do you have to do this?" I shook my head with a wry smile. "In fact, this matter has a lot to do with me, but I can't tell you the reason for it for the time being. You must take this money. In addition, I'll transfer some money to this card every year." Chen Xuanda was silent for a while, but in the end, he still took the card. It wasn't convenient for me to stay here for long, so I hurriedly left the Taiyuan branch and rushed back home. From that day onwards, I stayed at home and didn't dare to go far. At the same time, I thought of a way to deal with the Liu family. However, no matter how hard I thought, I couldn't come up with a solution. With my parents here, I couldn't run away by myself. If I brought my parents along, where could I run to? Before I could make up my mind, a week later, Chen Xuanda finally sent me news that the Liu family had appeared. Moreover, Chen Xuanda saw the Liu family's people with his own eyes. According to him, there were several people from the Liu family. One of them was a young man with a broken arm. He should be Liu Zhenyang. Liu Zhenyang actually came personally. I felt even more depressed. A broken arm had a great impact on one's cultivation. Even if Liu Zhenyang's strength wasn't ordinary, it was best for him to stay at home and recuperate. Yet, he disregarded everything and personally came to look for me. It could be seen how much hatred he had in his heart. After receiving this news, I didn't hesitate and immediately made up my mind. Liu Zhenyang definitely wouldn't let me off. He wouldn't even let my family off. No matter what, I had to take my parents and leave this place. I had to hide somewhere else to avoid the Liu family. However, just as I was about to go and explain the situation to my parents, my heart suddenly shivered and my footsteps stopped. I felt a strong fluctuation of Tao energy not far from my house. This fluctuation of Tao energy was emitted from a person's body. Moreover, from what I could feel, this person was at least at the peak of pressure point realm or even at the glorious knowledge realm. Had the Liu family already arrived? I hurried out of my house and walked to the front door to take a look. On the side of the road outside my house, there was an unfamiliar middle-aged man sitting cross-legged. When he saw me come out, he stared at me like a hawk. A playful smile appeared on his face, but he didn't say anything to me. He didn't even stand up. He just looked at me silently. In an instant, I understood. This person was definitely sent by Lu Zhenyang to keep an eye on me and not let me leave first. At this time, it had only been half an hour since Chen Xuanda's call. What a ruthless and decisive Lu Zhenyang. He had probably asked for my address the moment he arrived and sent someone to keep an eye on me. I couldn't help but admit that Lu Zhenyang had grown a lot compared to the time at the Young Phoenix gathering. In the past, he definitely wouldn't have been able to use such methods. My heart became even more gloomy. Chen Xuanda told me that Lu Zhenyang didn't just bring one person, but even if it was just one person, I might not be able to defeat him even if I risked my life. What should I do? I silently stood there and thought for a minute. Then, I turned around and returned home. I directly ran to my parents and briefly told them about the situation. Then, I said to them, I have a way to stall the person in front of the door. You two can use this chance to run out and then take the train to the train station. When you're out of town, contact me and I'll come find you. After I finished speaking, my parents still had a confused expression. It seemed that they didn't understand what I said. In the end, my dad frowned and asked, "Third baby, you said that someone came to take revenge on you? Then can't we just call the police?" My mom quickly followed up, "Yeah, let's call the police. When the police come, we'll be safe. Why do we have to run out of town?" I opened my mouth, but I really didn't know how to explain. The police. To people in the metaphysics world, they were really too weak. Looking at Lu Zhenyang's attitude, not to mention the police, even if he called the special forces, they wouldn't be able to stop him. Just as I wanted to continue persuading them, there was another wave of energy from afar. This time, there were at least 5 or 6 people. Chapter 169. My parents still wanted to say something to me, but it was already too late. In this desperate situation, I took out my phone and called Yi Pianpian, but I couldn't get through to her. In the end, I could only send her a message and tell her that the Lu family had found my house. The people from the Metaphysics Union couldn't be relied on, but in this desperate situation, this was the last thing I could do. After sending the message, I didn't expect the Metaphysics Union to appear, so I hurriedly ran out of the door. Lu Zhenyang and the others didn't have any intention of hiding their whereabouts, so I could easily sense their direction. At this moment, I couldn't care less about the person guarding the door. After going out, I hastily rushed in Lu Zhenyang's direction. The person guarding the door also followed closely behind me, but he quickly realized that my target was Lu Zhenyang and the others, so he stopped. Lu Zhenyang's group was really fast. When I was at home, I sensed that they were around 1 kilometer away from my house. However, when I ran out, I bumped into a black sedan with a Beijing license plate 200 or 300 meters away. After noticing me, the black car immediately stopped. The car door opened and a few people got out. It was similar to the information that Chen Xuanda had provided. Besides Lu Zhenyang, there were 4 other people, but I couldn't see through their strength. One of them was a black-robed old man, who even gave me a faint feeling that I was facing Liang Tianxin. Lu Zhenyang's temperament was also very different from before. In the past, he was obviously arrogant, and his eyes were filled with arrogance. But now, his expression was much colder, and his left sleeve, starting from the joint, was hanging down emptily. He actually didn't install anything like a prosthesis, and just let his broken arm be exposed. After seeing me, Lu Zhenyang's eyes instantly lit up, and the corner of his mouth rose into a cold smile. He asked me, "Brother Zhou, you seem to be in a hurry. Where are you going?" I knew that he was most likely trying to tease me like an eagle trying to catch a chick, but I didn't dare to be angry. I lowered my head and said to Lu Zhenyang in a calm voice, "I know why you are here. No matter who was right or wrong, I crippled one of your arms. If you want, I can cripple my own arm right now. Of course, you can also do it yourself." After I finished speaking, before Lu Zhenyang could say anything, The black-clothed elder snorted and said to me in disdain, "One arm? Your lowly life can't even compare to half an arm of my grandson." Grandson? I was stunned. No wonder this old man's aura was so terrifying. Could he be the current head of the Liu family, Liu Zhenyang's grandfather? I felt even more bitter in my heart. If the head of the Liu family personally came out, then it seemed that the Liu family was determined to deal with me. In this situation, even if the metaphysics headquarters found out about this, they probably wouldn't be able to do anything. At this moment, Liu Zhenyang smiled and said to the black-clothed elder, "Third grandpa, he is very popular in the metaphysics headquarters. He has a peak 4 meridians talent. His future will be limitless." The black-clothed elder also sneered, "For meridians talent? That will only happen when he grows up. If he dies now, in the younger generation, your talent will be number 1. As for that Yi Piampian, she's just a woman. In the future, after she marries into our Liu family, no one in the younger generation will be able to threaten our Liu family's position." As the two of them echoed each other, I suddenly understood. Perhaps the Liu family didn't just want to take revenge on me, they also wanted to get rid of a potential threat. Just like what the old man said, as long as I wasn't around, Liu Zhenyang would be the number 1 person in the younger generation. Thinking about it, a large family with tens of years of history, although it couldn't compare to the Qinling Han family or the Mang Mountains Zhang family, it definitely wasn't a reckless family. No matter what it was, it would definitely consider the bigger picture. However, in this case, it seemed that there was no hope for me to survive today. I remained silent for a while before raising my head to look at Liu Zhenyang. In a low voice, I said again, "You can take me away now. No matter how you deal with me, don't do it in front of my family. That way, your Liu family won't lose face." This was my last hope. Liu Zhenyang definitely wouldn't let me go. It was obvious that the Liu family wanted to kill me. In this situation, this was the only thing I could hope for. At this moment, Liu Zhenyang smiled at me and walked in front of me. He extended his hand and hammered me. He said gently, "Brother Zhou, what are you talking about? My grandpa is just joking with you. I'm just here to have fun. I just happened to hear that your family is here. How can I not go in and visit uncle and auntie?" After saying that, he still wore a smile and looked at me warmly. My heart was ice cold. Liu Zhenyang was so ruthless. He didn't even want to give me any face. When begging was no longer of any use, the only way left was to risk their lives. I clenched my teeth and threw all of the talismans I had on me at the black-robed elder. These talismans were mostly the fierce yang talismans and gathering talismans that I had used in the past. These 2 talismans instantly gathered a large amount of yin and yang energy. After they collided in the air, there was a loud explosion. However, my target wasn't the black-robed elder. These talismans were only there to obstruct his vision. My target was Liu Zhenyang. When I threw the talismans, I didn't use any energy. Instead, I pounced on Liu Zhenyang and hugged him. At the moment I hugged him, my hands immediately formed a golden light seal. At the same time, I chanted the golden light divine incantation. In an instant, a thick layer of golden light enveloped me and Liu Zhenyang. Facing a person with the power of a heavenly master, I didn't dare to think that I could use a normal method to control Liu Zhenyang in front of him. I could only use this defensive golden light divine incantation to control Liu Zhenyang and increase my own defense. Only then would I have a small chance of success. Originally, I thought that Liu Zhenyang's power had increased by a lot and that he would inevitably struggle. However, the strange thing was that Liu Zhenyang seemed to be scared silly. He stood there motionlessly and allowed me to control him. Even the black-robed elder didn't move. He just looked at me grabbing Liu Zhenyang and using the golden light divine incantation. After doing all of this, I secretly heaved a sigh of relief. Although he had the power of a heavenly master, my golden light divine incantation should be able to resist him for a moment, right? As long as I could resist him for a second, or even half a second, I was confident that I could kill Lu Zhenyang when he made his move. He would definitely hold back for fear of harming Lu Zhenyang. However, just as I was thinking about this, I saw that the black-robed elder revealed a mocking smile. He sighed softly. Golden light divine incantation. Those old Taoists treasure this divine incantation very much. I didn't think that you would actually know how to use it. This is really out of my expectations. Although he said that, he didn't look surprised at all and continued to look at me mockingly. Even Lu Zhenyang, who was currently being controlled by me, revealed a smile. He said to the black-robed elder, "That's right. Don't look down on Zhou Yi's poor background." He amazed everyone at the young phoenix gathering. It wasn't just me, even Han Wunan from the Han family wasn't his match. After the event, I couldn't find out who his teacher was, so I've always been very curious. The black-robed elder replied indifferently, "What's there to be curious about? After we kill him, we'll search his 3 souls. Then, we'll know everything we need to know." My heart pounded violently and I felt even more uneasy. The two of them didn't take me seriously at all. It seemed that they didn't care that Lu Zhenyang was currently being controlled by me. This doubt didn't last long. Very soon, I knew why they didn't care. The black-clothed old man sighed and raised his left hand slightly. I couldn't even see what kind of divine power he had used, but in an instant, I felt that my body was no longer under my control. The arm that had been clamping Lu Zhenyang slowly loosened, and the golden light surrounding me was suddenly cut off from the Tao Qi on my body. Without the support of Tao Qi, the golden light divine incantation couldn't hold on no matter how powerful it was and slowly dissipated. When Lu Zhenyang smiled and walked out of my embrace, my heart was extremely cold. Chapter 170. I knew that the Heavenly Master Realm was terrifying, but I didn't think that it would be this terrifying. In that instant I was like a puppet. Although my mind was still working, I couldn't control my body at all. I couldn't even move a finger. What was even more terrifying was that when he made his move, I didn't have any sense of danger. No wonder when I made my move, the two of them were so calm. It turns out that they already knew this would happen. At this time, Lu Zhenyang turned around and smiled at me. He affectionately patted my shoulder and said, "All right, Brother Zhou, let's not mess around anymore. Let's go to your house and have a seat." I stood still, but that black-clothed old man became impatient. He reached out his hand and patted my shoulder. I staggered forward. Just like before, I couldn't control my body at all. I couldn't even speak. I could only walk forward blankly and lead the group of people towards my house. At this time, my parents were already standing at the door. Seeing my distressed expression, they hurriedly ran over and asked me anxiously, "Third child, what's wrong? Are they the people you were talking about?" I really wanted to open my mouth and tell them to run. I also wanted to turn around and fight with Lu Zhenyang. However, at this moment, I couldn't move my mouth or my hands. The only thing I could do was to let big drops of tears fall from my eyes. Seeing this scene, my parents panicked even more. My mom pulled my arm with all her strength, and was so anxious that her tears also came out. She constantly said to me, "Third child, Mom and Dad are here. Don't cry, don't be afraid." At this time, my dad suddenly turned around and ran back home. After a while, he hurriedly rushed back with a hoe in his hand. He stood in front of me and blocked Lu Zhenyang's group. He fiercely roared, "You dogs, if you want to bully my child, you have to ask the hoe in this father's hand first." The tears in my eyes flowed even more. Lu Zhenyang's group looked at each other with a strange expression, and then laughed. Lu Zhenyang chuckled as he walked in front of my dad. He didn't mind the hoe in his hand at all and said with a smile, "Uncle, we just came to beg for a bowl of rice. Are you sure you want to be so unfriendly?" My dad gripped the hoe even tighter. "You King bullied my kid and you still want to lie to Lousy. Cut the crap, if you want to fight then fight, if you don't then scram. Don't talk nonsense with Lousy. My dad, who had been honest all his life, didn't even dare to talk back loudly when he quarreled with my mom. But now, his eyes were bloodshot, and his mouth was full of obscenities. He looked like a gangster who had been in society for decades. He didn't look like a farmer at all. But standing behind me, I could see his trembling calves. The surrounding people started laughing again. After Lu Zhenyang finished laughing, he asked my dad, "Then, uncle, I'll really make my move." Bah! My dad spat on the ground, and said with a heroic voice like the chief of the underworld, "How much strength can a brat like you have? You can't even match the strength of Lousy's hoe. All of you can come at me together. If you want to bully my kid, then don't even think about getting anything good today." The smile on Lu Zhenyang's face became even wider, and he said faintly, "Whether I have strength or not, don't come to a conclusion too early, uncle." As soon as he said that, his body flashed, and with a speed that couldn't be seen by the naked eye, he fiercely slapped my dad's face. When he returned to his original spot, my dad didn't even have time to move the hoe in his hand, but his entire body staggered and fell to the ground. His tanned face swelled up. "Uncle, do you think I have strength now?" Lu Zhenyang was still smiling warmly. He looked like a university student studying in the city, but his mouth was saying the most vicious words in the world. He didn't use his Dao Qi, and only used his own strength, so my dad could still struggle to get up from the ground with the hoe. After he got up, he once again raised the hoe in front of him. His words were already somewhat unclear, but he still had that unscrupulous look on his face as he fiercely said, "Brat, Lousy is a generation lower than you. Do you really think that Lousy can't do anything to you?" With that, he shouted, and the hoe in his hand swung towards Lu Zhenyang. His speed was very fast, so fast that he didn't look like a 50 to 60-year-old farmer, but rather like an old hen protecting its chicks. The hoe that could only be used to hoe the fields was like a treasured blade that fiercely slashed towards the enemy. However, after the hoe slashed down, Lu Zhenyang, who was standing there, had already disappeared. Instead, he had inexplicably run to his side. At this moment, Lu Zhenyang was still calm and said slowly, "Uncle, it seems that you really can't do anything to me." With that, he slapped the other side of my dad's face, as if he was swatting a mosquito. This time, he used a lot of strength. My dad's body was like a spinning top that spun a few times in the air before falling to the ground again. Blood continuously flowed from the corner of his mouth. However, even though he was seriously injured, my dad wasn't the least bit afraid. He used both hands to support himself and tried to get up from the ground. Unfortunately, he tried a few times, but he didn't succeed. In the end, he could only turn over and spit at Lu Zhenyang. He used all his strength to wave his hand as if he wanted to hit this dog with the hoe again. However, it was a pity that his hoe had already disappeared. After crazily waving it for a long time, not only was it unable to harm a single hair on Lu Zhenyang's head, but it also aggravated his own injuries. He coughed loudly, and blood constantly flowed out. The sound of his coughing was like a sharp file that was crazily cutting into my heart. I desperately wanted to use my Dao Qi and chant an incantation. I desperately wanted to rush in front of Lu Zhenyang. Even if I couldn't defeat him, it was fine if I died in his hands. However, I couldn't do it. I couldn't do anything. I couldn't use my Dao Qi, I couldn't chant an incantation, and I couldn't even rush in front of Lu Zhenyang. I was like the most destitute beggar. I stood there and could only watch my dad risk his life to die. I could only let my weak tears flow. At this time, Lu Zhenyang didn't seem to have any interest in torturing my dad. He kicked him far away, from the entrance of my house all the way to the courtyard. He fell heavily on the ground. The heart-wrenching coughs finally stopped, and we couldn't hear any more sounds. Then, he calmly clapped his hands and walked in front of my mom. With a face full of smiles he said, "Auntie, I'm tired. Can you make me a bowl of noodles? Seeing him walk over, my mom's entire body trembled violently. She was usually a fierce woman. When she was at odds with my dad, she could scratch his face until it was bloody. However, at this moment, she couldn't be fierce at all. Her eyes were filled with tears as she knelt in front of Lu Zhenyang. She cried and begged him to let me go. The smile on Lu Zhenyang's face gradually turned cold. He pointed at his broken arm and said fiercely, "You want me to let him go, but you didn't let me go back then? Do you know who broke this arm? It's your son. Why should I let him go now? Tell me, why should I let him go?" After saying that, Lu Zhenyang took a few deep breaths. Like a madman, he rubbed his face and actually smiled again. He said to my mom, "That's why, I definitely can't let him go. How about this, you go make me a bowl of noodles. After I eat a bowl of noodles, I'll be in a good mood and maybe I'll let him go?" My mom was like a drowning person who grabbed onto the last straw. Her eyes suddenly lit up as she asked him, "Really?" Lu Zhenyang impatiently waved his hand. "Of course it's true, hurry up and go." My mom used her fastest speed to crawl up from the ground and rushed into the kitchen. At this time, Lu Zhenyang seemed to be tired of playing and said to the black-clothed old man, "Third grandpa, I don't want to play anymore. Let's destroy his house." The black-clothed old man revealed a sinister smile. He pointed forward and chanted a single sound spell. In an instant, even I felt a tremor under my feet. It was as if there was an earthquake. After a rumbling sound, my house completely collapsed. In a short few seconds, what was originally a clean and tidy farmhouse was only a pile of broken walls. My mom, who rushed into the kitchen, and my dad, who was lying in the yard, were all gone. I stood there blankly. In front of me was the despairing wreckage and dust. In the distance was the sunset and blood-dyed clouds. Chapter 171. Dad. Mom, a mournful voice finally gushed out from my mouth along with a mouthful of heart blood that was stuck in my chest. The black-clothed elder didn't remove the restriction on my body. The reason why I made a sound was because I had used up all of my Tao energy and the dark green energy to crazily squeeze my heart, causing a mouthful of heart blood to flow out. At the same time that my vocal cords were destroyed, I let out a final scream. However, that was all I could do. After screaming, blood continuously gushed out from my mouth along with a heart-wrenching pain. However, I couldn't feel it at all. I only wanted to crawl forward and dig my parents out from the ruins. I wanted to kneel down and kowtow to Lu Zhenyang to beg him to save my parents. But I can't even do the humblest of thoughts. My body still couldn't move as blood and tears covered my entire body. Everything in front of me was already blurry, but my mind was abnormally clear from the pain. The black-clothed elder's voice sounded in my ear. He seemed to be asking for Lu Zhenyang's opinion. "Zhenyang, let's leave after killing this brat. The Metaphysics Society must have received news of this. We shouldn't delay any further." I blankly listened to their judgment of my fate, but there wasn't a single ripple in my heart. Lu Zhenyang seemed to be silent for a long time before he finally said with a smile, "I suddenly don't want to kill him. My broken arm will accompany me for the rest of my life. How can I let him die so easily? Third grandpa, just cripple his cultivation and let him live on. He can only watch as I advance towards the peak, while he can only live in pain and self-blame for the rest of his life." The black-clothed elder seemed to be frightened by his words. After a slight hesitation, he didn't say anything else. He only walked over and placed his hand on my shoulder. As he moved, a thick and abundant qi of the way entered my shoulder. In the blink of an eye, it reached my meridian of the heavens. After destroying my meridians, the terrifying qi of the way gathered in my 8 extraordinary meridians and violently exploded. Not only did he want to destroy my cultivation, but he also wanted to destroy my talent. The pain in my body didn't affect me in the slightest. After letting out that miserable scream, I was already numb from the pain. After doing all of this, the black-clothed elder finally released the restriction on me. After seeing my body softly fall to the ground, he left my side and walked straight to Lu Zhenyang's side before saying gloomily, "That's enough." Lu Zhenyang walked over and squatted beside me. He looked down at me and sighed in pity. Top-tier Formeridian talent. It's gone just like that. What a pity. At this moment, his voice had already become bored to death, as if he no longer had any interest. He gave me one last look of disgust before turning around and hurriedly leaving with the black-clothed elder and the others. In the bleak winter village, no one knew what method the Lu family had used. Even though they had caused such a huge commotion, none of the neighbors appeared. It was as if no one had noticed what had happened here. After Lu Zhenyang and the rest had left, I didn't know how much time had passed before the rumbling sound of an excavator sounded from the surroundings. It seemed that someone was heading over here. Up until now, my mind was still clear and I hadn't fainted. I didn't even hear what Lu Zhenyang said before he left, nor did I hear the sound of a car. I only used my hands to support myself on the ground again and again, trying to gather my strength to climb up. However, I failed over and over again. I didn't know how many times I tried, but I finally managed to support myself up with trembling hands. I didn't have the time to climb up, nor did I have the time to check my body. I also didn't have the time to feel the pain in my body. I could only numbly and calmly crawl forward. I didn't know how much time had passed before I finally crawled to the courtyard that was in ruins. I weakly started to move the bricks under my body. The bricks that were as light as paper in my eyes in the past were now as heavy as a mountain. No matter how hard I tried, I couldn't move a single stone. However, I didn't give up. I coughed and gasped for breath as I continued to move towards the ruins. At that moment, a few people wearing workers' uniforms walked to my side. The leader lowered his head to look at me. Then, he frowned and ordered the others, "Take this person away and send him to the hospital. The rest of you, drive the forklift and quickly clean up this place." As soon as he said that, two people quickly walked over. Each of them grabbed one of my arms and pulled me up from the ground. Then, they dragged me into a car. At this moment, I finally broke down. I tried to struggle with all my might, but those two ordinary workers were like two heavenly masters to me. They exerted a bit of force with their arms, and all my struggles were suppressed. I finally gave up all hope. I took one last glance at my house that had already turned into ruins. Then, my vision turned black and I fainted. I had a very long dream. In the dream, I turned into a mouse one moment, then into a deity the next. However, most of the time, I saw myself as an angry monkey. I lifted my head to look at the sky and bent down to look at the ground. There was an indescribable brutality in my heart that made me want to tear the world apart. I didn't know how much time had passed when I slowly woke up. I struggled to prop myself up. I found that I was lying on an exquisite bed that had a nice fragrance. Although his body was still a little sore, it was more of a warm and comfortable feeling. I couldn't help but have an illusion that everything that had happened before was just a dream. Lu Zhenyang hadn't found me, my parents hadn't died, and my house hadn't turned into ruins. However, when I opened my mouth, I could only make a hoarse and unpleasant sound. Thus, I collapsed on the bed and stared at the ceiling blankly. My tears and snot had already flowed out. At this moment, I couldn't even cry. I was as numb as a marionette. No, not like a marionette. A marionette could still move, but I was lying there, too lazy to move. I was as silent and lonely as a piece of rotten wood. I didn't know when Yi Pianpian had appeared beside me. She held a wooden bowl in her hand. While walking, she stirred the black liquid in the bowl with a spoon. When she raised her head and saw my open eyes, she stopped what she was doing. There was a hint of joy in her cold voice. She asked me, "When did you wake up?" I didn't reply. It seemed that she didn't wait for my answer either. After frowning slightly, she nodded and said, "I almost forgot. Grandpa Li said that your throat is injured. You won't be able to speak for several months. Lie down and don't move. Drink this bowl of medicine first. Then, she skillfully walked to the bed and sat down. She scooped up a spoonful of medicine and brought it to my lip. It was only now that I could see Yi Piampian clearly. A thought suddenly popped up in my originally deathly still heart. I abruptly sat up and knocked over the medicinal concoction in Yi Piampian's spoon, causing her to furrow her brows. However, I didn't care about that. I opened my mouth and mumbled to her for a long time. However, even I couldn't understand what I was saying. In a hurry, I pulled her hand and repeatedly wrote on her palm. Where are my parents? Are they still alive? At that moment, I was still very weak. Yi Piampian didn't even need to use her Dao Qi to easily throw me to the ground. However, she didn't do so. She just frowned even more. I didn't know how many times I wrote, but she finally understood my words. She retracted her hand and said in a low voice, "Zhou, when Grandpa Li and I saw you, you were already in the hospital. We didn't go to your house, but I heard from the worker who sent you there that 2 corpses were found in your yard. At that time, they had already been sent to your local crematorium." I listened blankly. I wasn't excited, nor was I angry. Yes, I had already expected the result. What was there to be angry about? I just returned to my previous silent appearance and laid there again. Then Yi Piampian said something to me, but I didn't hear a word clearly. In the end, she suddenly leaned over and grabbed my shoulders with both hands. She shook me and said, "Zhou, wake up! How are you going to take revenge on Lu Zhenyang in the future with your dispirited appearance?" Revenge. Take revenge on Lu Zhenyang. My deathly still heart only wavered for a moment before returning to its previous state. As soon as I woke up, I sensed the situation in my body. The Dao Qi in the 5 apertures in the heavenly veins had long disappeared. The entire heavenly veins were blocked, and there was no Dao Qi at all. My 8 extraordinary meridians were also in a mess. My meridians were sticky and twisted. The old man in black was indeed a heavenly master. When he attacked, he didn't leave any leeway. At that moment, I was a complete cripple. Chapter 172. Yi Piampian's temperament seemed to have changed greatly. She wasn't as cold and arrogant as she used to be. She pressed my shoulder and nagged a lot, but I couldn't even hear a single word clearly. I didn't know how long it had been, but she finally gave up. She let go of my shoulder and stood up with the wooden bowl. She glanced at me in disgust before leaving in a hurry. I thought that she was going to abandon me, but then Yi Piampian came over every day with a wooden bowl in her hand and carefully fed me medicine. I didn't complain and didn't even take the medicine. I just lay there numbly, unable to find my direction and struggling like a machine. Yi Piampian stuffed something into my mouth and I swallowed it. My mouth was often scalded by the hot medicine, but I didn't feel any pain. Instead, I felt inexplicably comfortable because of the stinging pain. I lived on the bed like a pig. I thought that Yi Piampian wouldn't put up with me for too long, but unexpectedly, Yi Piampian came over on time every day for a month. Every few days, she would even turn over my body with a look of disgust, even though her actions were rough. Sometimes she would even throw me off the bed. But inexplicably, the deathly stillness in my heart seemed to dissipate a little. One day, more than a month later, Yi Piampian came to my bed again. She didn't hold a wooden bowl as usual, but a piece of clothing and a wooden box. Her expression seemed to be colder than before. She threw the things in her hands onto the bed and said to me coldly, "Zhou, I checked you yesterday. Your body has recovered. Although you can't cultivate for the time being, it's not a problem for you to get out of bed and walk. Grandpa Li originally wanted to help you with the grudge between you and the Lu family, but the Lu family is too deeply involved with the Metaphysics Association. Even Grandpa Li can't directly take action against the Lu family. So, you have to take revenge with your own hand. Don't think that you can't cultivate after your meridians are blocked. Grandpa Lee checked your body before and said that there's a special power in your body that's helping you repair your body. As long as you work harder, the problem with your meridians will recover sooner or later. Hearing what he said, I suddenly became more spirited. I couldn't believe it. Special power? Is she talking about the dark green power? Who was this Grandpa Lee she was talking about? After thinking for a long time, I remembered that she had told me before that she was the President Li Liguang who had given me the fan. At this time, Yi Pianpian seemed to be silent for a while, and then she continued, Grandpa Li also asked me to tell you that the true dragon vein is very helpful for your recovery. As long as you nourish your body with the true dragon vein every day, you can speed up the recovery of your meridians. Besides, if you have the saliva of the true dragon, your meridians will recover immediately after swallowing it. True dragon vein? True dragon saliva? What did she mean by that? Not waiting for me to understand, Yi Pianpian suddenly grabbed my chest and pulled me up from the bed. Her beautiful face was filled with anger as she shouted at me, Grandpa Lee doesn't want to tell me this. Tell me the truth. Did you steal the true dragon's vein of the Metaphysics Association? I opened my mouth and tried to speak, but I didn't know what to say. My mind was in a mess. That old President Lee, he knows that I stole the true dragon's vein? But that shouldn't be the case. He's the old president of the Metaphysics Association. After knowing this news, he would definitely tear me into pieces. Why didn't he do that? Instead, he reminded me to use the true dragon's vein to heal myself? Also, what is the true dragon saliva that he mentioned? Before I could figure it out, Yi Pianpian threw me back onto the bed and shouted at me without caring about her image, You stole the true dragon's vein and destroyed the foundation of the Metaphysics Association. I really don't know why Grandpa Lee still spoils you so much. Also, I'm going to the Fire God Temple with Grandpa Lee tomorrow. I've left the clothes and your things here. I don't care whether you live or die. After saying that, she turned around and walked away angrily. After she left for a long time, I took the clothes and the wooden box back in a daze. I was still thinking about the true dragon's vein. At that moment, I suddenly saw a small note on the wooden box. There was a line of words written on it. Third child, take your revenge slowly. No matter what, life has to continue. Go and collect your parents' remains and bury them in the ancestral grave. Seeing this familiar name, tears welled up in my eyes. I cried so hard that I couldn't make a sound. I laid there and cried. After a long time, I calmed down a little. I looked at the small note hesitantly. Who wrote this? Is it the Grandpa Lee that Yi Pianpian mentioned? Why did he use such a tone to talk to me? Even though I couldn't understand it, I felt an indescribable warmth in my heart. Even though there were still tears in my eyes, they weren't tears of sadness, but of grievance. It was just like when I was bullied outside and saw my parents when I returned home and felt wronged. After I calmed down, I threw my doubts to the back of my mind and slowly opened the small box. Inside were my jade bracelet, the square sky fan, the dark green bead, and even the death scripture cloth that I had carried with me all these years. What was even stranger was that the magic compass that I had gotten from President Su was also here. Moreover, the broken pieces of the compass had been repaired. Although it had lost its effectiveness as a magic tool, it was more than enough to be used as an ordinary compass. I furrowed my brows and pondered, but I couldn't remember if I had thrown the broken compass away or if I had kept it with me. The items that I had, whether it was the death scripture, the jade bracelet, or the dark green bead, were all rare treasures. It wasn't that I was arrogant, but even a heavenly master would be tempted by these items. But now they had been returned intact. He didn't covet anything from me and didn't even care about the true dragon's vein. Why did President Lee do this? Could it be that it was like what Director Song Xing had said when he had brought the square sky fan over? President Lee admired the geomancy question that I had answered during the dragon seizing tournament? This was too inconceivable. Pure admiration couldn't have reached such a level. After thinking for a long time, I still couldn't understand. In the end, I could only put these questions aside. No matter who had written that note, the words on it were correct. No matter what, I had to go and retrieve my parents' remains. I lifted the quilt and jumped off the bed. As soon as I touched the ground, my knees went soft and I fell to the ground. I hadn't moved for a long time. Although Yi Pianpian would occasionally come back to help me move, my muscles had already withered. My joints and nerves had been oppressed for too long, so much so that I had temporarily lost the ability to walk. I supported myself on the edge of the bed and slowly stood up. After a long time, I finally regained my muscles and got used to the rhythm of walking. After that, I rested in my room for a day. When I woke up the next day, my body had finally returned to normal. I put on my clothes and put on the jade bracelet and other items. It was the first time in over a month that I had walked out of my room. After getting out of the house, I found myself in an ordinary house in the countryside. The surroundings were empty, and I could only see other houses in the distance. I tried to check the other rooms in the courtyard, but all of them were locked. It was clear that there was no one here except for me. I gave up and locked my room. Then, I leisurely walked out of the room. This place was a deserted village. It was probably where Yi Pianpian usually lived. As for President Li, I didn't know their relationship, but I guessed he usually lived here. I walked to the roadside and waited for more than half an hour. Finally, I got on a bus that was heading to the city. Since my throat wasn't very comfortable, I didn't ask where I was after getting on the bus. I just paid the fare and waited for another half an hour. When I entered a bustling city, I found that I was in the suburbs of the capital. The metaphysics headquarters wasn't far from this suburban county. I guessed that Grandpa Li and the others lived near the headquarters. After getting off the bus, I lifted my eyes to look in the direction of the city. Chapter 173. Revenge, to the current me, was simply an extravagant hope. However, unlike before, my heart was no longer in a dead silence. Instead, there was a glimmer of hope, even though this hope came without any reason. Perhaps it was because Grandpa Li said that I could recover my cultivation. Although I couldn't see any hope of my meridians recovering, I had an inexplicable trust in Grandpa Li. Even my confidence had recovered. Next, I looked in the direction of the Liu family's residence one last time before suppressing all the thoughts in my heart. I hurried to the long-distance bus station to return home. On the way, I closed my eyes and silently mobilized my Tao energy. However, I couldn't sense the Tao energy that I used to be able to move freely. In a flash, I seemed to have returned to the state I was in when I first sensed the Tao energy. However, I wasn't impatient and continued to explore. In the past month, my temperament had already been worn down. When the bus arrived in Shangxi, I was still sensing the Tao energy when I suddenly heard Tong Tong's voice in my mind. She seemed to be very happy and said to me in a sweet voice, "Brother, I'm awake. It's been so long, but you didn't miss me?" I was slightly stunned. Ever since we joined hands to deal with the Jinggui, Tong Tong said that she had used up her heavenly yin energy and needed to sleep for a period of time. Who would have thought that she would sleep until now? So, she didn't even know what had happened before? My furrowed eyebrows relaxed. It was a good thing that Tong Tong didn't know. She was a pure girl. Although she had seen many despicable and malicious things after following me for so many years, those things added up couldn't compare to Liu Zhenyang's evil deeds. It was a blessing that Tong Tong didn't see it at that time. However, Tong Tong quickly noticed that something was wrong with me. She hurriedly asked me what happened. I naturally didn't tell her much. I just said that I was injured by a heavenly master, which was why I ended up in this situation. Tong Tong was very angry after hearing that. She said that she would take revenge for me. However, she quickly became discouraged and said in a sweet voice, "My heavenly yin energy has only recovered a little. If I want to cultivate to the level where I can defeat a heavenly master, I'm afraid that it will take another 4 to 5 years. Her words shocked me. Cultivating to the level of a heavenly master would only take 4 to 5 years? If this were to spread, the people in the Metaphysics Association would be scared to death. Let alone 4 to 5 years, they wouldn't even have the confidence to do it in 40 to 50 years. But Tong Tong was still not satisfied. I helplessly told Tong Tong that if she could really reach the Heavenly Master's realm in 4 to 5 years, her speed would be frightening. She didn't need to be discouraged. However, Tong Tong immediately replied, "But it's not enough. I can see your meridians. Big brother, it seems that you won't be able to cultivate in the future. The person who injured you is really hateful. But big brother, don't worry. Tong Tong will definitely speed up her cultivation in the future to protect big brother." I didn't know if it was because I had been too pretentious recently, but when I heard Tong Tong's words, I felt a lump in my throat. When I woke up on Yi Piampian's bed, my only thought was to die. At that time, I felt that I had no one left in this world. I didn't have any family, and I didn't have any kinship. Living was no different from dying. But now, I didn't think that way. Whether it was Tong Tong, Grandpa Li who left me the note and didn't care about the true dragon's vein, or even Yi Piampian, they were all people who cared about me. They all made me feel warm. I sniffled and said to Tong Tong with a smile, "Don't worry. Actually, big brother can still cultivate. A grandpa told me that as long as I use the true dragon's vein to nourish it for a few days, my meridians will recover to their original state." Speaking of this, I suddenly remembered the true dragon's saliva that Grandpa Li had mentioned. I had thought about it carefully on the way here. When I was in the cave of the true dragon's vein, I had seen a small drop of milky white liquid floating below the mouth of the true dragon's vein. Although I was amazed at that time, I didn't pay much attention to the drop of liquid because of the mystical nature of the true dragon's vein. Even when I took the true dragon's vein, I didn't pay much attention to the drop of liquid. Later on, the true dragon's vein stayed in the jade bracelet. Although I could absorb the dragon energy from it, I couldn't take the true dragon's vein out. As for whether the drop of liquid entered the jade bracelet with the true dragon's vein, I was even more confused. Fortunately, Tong Tong stayed in the jade bracelet. She should know the answer. I hurried to describe the drop of liquid to Tong Tong. "Have you seen it before?" I thought that she would have to think for a while, but she nodded immediately. "Yes, I have." I was excited. According to Yi Piampian, after taking the true dragon's saliva, my meridians would recover to their original state immediately. With that thought, I asked Tong Tong, "Can you take that drop of liquid out of my body?" Tong Tong sounded aggrieved. "That drop of liquid has a lot of yang energy. Even her heavenly yin energy will be corroded when it gets close to that drop of liquid. Usually, when she stays in the jade bracelet, she has to avoid that drop of liquid. Now I can't take it out." I had heard about heavenly yin energy from Tong Tong. It was the unique yin energy of her heavenly ghost infant. In terms of power and quality, it was much stronger than ordinary yin energy. It was also the power of a heavenly ghost infant. However, I didn't expect that even Tong Tong's heavenly yin energy couldn't get close to that drop of liquid. What should I do? With that thought, I couldn't help but feel upset. Tong Tong could feel my mood. She apologized to me as if she had done something bad. I felt sorry for her and tried to comfort her for a long time. However, Tong Tong was still a little disappointed. She didn't want to talk to me anymore. "I want to go back and cultivate." Then, she didn't say anything. At this moment, the car arrived at our county. I got out of the highway and took a taxi to the crematorium in our county. According to Yi Piampian, my parents had been sent to the crematorium. Although many days had passed, if no one had claimed their ashes, they would still be there. When I arrived at the crematorium, I asked the security guard at the entrance. He confirmed that the crematorium would take care of the crematorium if no one claimed their ashes. Then, I hurried to the crematorium. Under the security guard's guidance, I found Director Liu, who was in charge of this crematorium. Director Liu was a fat middle-aged man. From his appearance, I could tell that he was a rich man. I had always heard that the crematorium was a good place. Even the cleaners could get a bonus of more than 100,000 renminbi at the end of the year. Looking at Director Liu's appearance, it seemed the rumors were true. When he saw me, Director Liu smiled and asked me to sit down. Then, he said in an evasive tone, "The crematorium receives a lot of unclaimed remains every day. It's not easy to find them. Moreover, these are from a few months ago. It will take a long time just to look through the files." Then, he said something like, "We don't have enough manpower." I understood immediately. He wanted money. I didn't have time to talk to him. "I don't care how much money you have to pay as long as you can help me find the remains." As soon as Director Liu heard me, the fat wrinkles on his face lit up. He gestured at me and said, "It's 50,000 renminbi. I can find it in one afternoon." The crematorium was indeed a good place to make money. However, I didn't have time to argue with him. I swiped my bank card and gave him 50,000 renminbi. Although I had given most of the money to Chen Xuanda, I still had several 100,000 renminbi with me. When Mr. Li brought my things here, I also had my bank card with me. I didn't lack money. After receiving the money, Director Liu immediately went to do his job. His efficiency wasn't just for show. He didn't even need to wait for an entire afternoon. I had only waited for around 1 hour when he returned with 2 jars. Seeing the 2 ordinary jars in his hands, I couldn't help but feel a sharp pain in my heart. Perhaps it was because Director Liu saw that my face didn't look good, so he said that he had something to do and left with a smile. He left the crematorium to me. At first, I thought that I would be very sad, but after this interruption, I didn't feel that bad anymore. After all, it had been 2 months since the incident, so I didn't feel that bad anymore. No wonder people said that time was the best medicine to heal wound. Now, it seemed that it was true. I walked forward and hugged the 2 jars. I mumbled, "Dad, Mom, Sanwa is so sorry. I'm going to take you home now. Sanwa will take revenge for you. However, you don't need to worry. When Sanwa takes revenge, he will protect himself and live well." Then, I wiped my tears and prepared to leave. However, when I reached the door, I suddenly thought of something. Ashes weren't corpses, so why did Director Liu bring them to me so quickly? Could he have made a mistake? With that thought, I hurried to put the 2 jars down. It was easy to check if these were my parents' ashes. I just needed to use the ancestral seeking talisman that I had used on Lai Zhou's ancestral grave. However, my Tao energy was gone now, and I couldn't make any talismans. What should I do? After thinking for a while, I called Tong Tong. She looked tired, but I didn't notice it. I just told her what the ancestral seeking talisman looked like. Then, I asked her to use her Yin energy to help me simulate an ancestral seeking talisman. The ancestral seeking talisman was a kind of Yin seeking talisman. Using Yin energy to simulate it would have a similar effect. Soon, Tong Tong was ready. Then, I patted the ancestral seeking talisman on my body. A wisp of gray smoke flew out of my body and flew to an unknown place. Chapter 174. In that instant, I couldn't help but feel angry. People said that the crematorium was rich and that they could earn money from the dead. I didn't have any problem with that. However, they were making money and deceiving people at the same time. That was too much. They weren't just some random things. They were the remains of their parents. They had received a lot of money, but they had to bring back the remains of a stranger. They had to worship them every year. What was wrong with them? Moreover, in feng shui, the remains of one's parents symbolize the luck of one's ancestors. If they brought back the wrong remains, how could they still have the blessing of their ancestors? The people at the crematorium might not have taken it seriously, thinking that it was just a small mistake in their work to handle so many corpses in a day. But to the people involved, they only had one father and mother. A small mistake at the crematorium had caused a tragedy for the family. I left the 2 porcelain jars in the room and angrily went to find Director Liu. Fortunately, Director Liu hadn't gone far. When I came out of the room, I saw him and hurried to stop him. "What's going on?" After Director Liu was stunned for a while, he finally understood what I meant. He immediately put on a mocking smile, waved his hand and asked disdainfully, "We have always kept a record of these ashes. How can you say that they aren't your parents' ashes? Let me say something unpleasant. No matter who they are after they're burned, they're all ashes. How can you tell the difference?" I pulled a long face and told him about how I had used the ancestral seeking talisman. I emphasized that I was a feng shui master from the Shenzhen metaphysics branch. I wasn't joking. Director Liu smiled even more disdainfully and said to me earnestly, "Young man, I don't understand what you're talking about, but everyone knows that it's just superstition and can't be taken seriously. Even if you go to court, no one will believe you. All right, don't scare yourself. Take the ashes and go home." With that, he waved his hand and impatiently prepared to leave. From the looks of it, he didn't take this matter to heart at all. I was worried and hurried to pull him back. "Director Liu, since you have a record, I won't ask for more. Can you help me check again? Money isn't a problem. I just want to make sure that these are my parents' remains." Although Director Liu was greedy, I could tell from his appearance that he didn't lack money. Perhaps he was angered by my action of pulling him. He glared at me and spoke rudely. "Why are you pulling and tugging at me? I've explained it to you for a long time, but you didn't listen to me, did you? We have a record of all the ashes here. If we say it's your parents' remains, it's your parents. If you continue to pester us, I will ask the security guards to kick you out." Then, he took out his phone from his pocket and looked as though he was about to call the security guard. My face darkened. I coldly glanced at him and let go of his hand. In the past, if I met such a person, I would definitely make him suffer. But now, I don't have any Dao Qi on me, so I can't be as straightforward and direct as before. Director Liu look at I let him. He turned to look and didn't even to me. He'd do himself returning. From the looks of it, he had probably done this many times in the past. I stood there and thought for a while. In the end, I left alone. I left the 2 jars in the crematorium. They were other people's ashes. Perhaps someone would come to claim them. Although I wasn't confident in my work in the crematorium, staying here would give me hope. It was better than being taken away by me. After leaving the crematorium, I didn't go far. I checked into a hotel across the street and stayed there. For the next 2 days, I was thinking about how to go to the crematorium to find my parents' ashes. It wasn't hard to find them. I just needed to ask Tong Tong to help me simulate the ancestral seeking talisman. Then, I would sneak into the crematorium and follow the talisman to find the ashes. If it were before, it wouldn't be a problem for me. I could have done it in a few minutes. But now I had lost all of my power and my body was still in a weak state. Not to mention anything else, I couldn't even climb over the walls of the crematorium that were covered with electric fences. Tong Tong could easily sneak into the crematorium, but he couldn't do it alone. The ancestral seeking talisman only worked within a certain range. I had to go there myself. With no other choice, I could only stay here and slowly nurse my body. I didn't dare to hope that I could recover my Dao Qi, but at least when my body was healthy, with the help of my eyes, I could sneak into the crematorium. That shouldn't be too difficult. Of course, I wasn't idle these days. When I had nothing to do, I would wander around the crematorium's entrance. I didn't find many valuable clues, but I bought a pack of cigarettes every day. Soon, I became familiar with the security guard. After getting to know him, I started to ask him for information. The security guard's surname was Wu, and he looked to be in his 40s or 50s. He was a good talker. When I asked about the crematorium's management of the crematorium's ashes, he pouted his lips and said, "What management? The water is deep here." I didn't understand, but old Wu seemed to be interested in chatting. He took a sip of tea and said mysteriously, "Do you know why the crematorium earns so much money?" I cooperated and shook my head. Old Wu slammed his hand on the table and sighed. "Because it earns money from the dead." I was confused. If the crematorium doesn't earn money from the dead, does it earn money from the living? When I asked him again, old Wu shook his head in pain. "I'm not talking about the business of burning people and selling the urns. Although this business earns money, it's not the main business of the crematorium. You outsiders wouldn't be able to guess that the real business is." Halfway through his sentence, I still didn't understand. Old Wu felt that he had said too much. He abruptly shut his mouth and took another sip of tea. "Forget it. Why do I need to talk to a young man like you? Let's not talk about these things. When you have time, play a game of chess with your uncle." I hurried to give him the cigarette in my hand and pulled him to tell me more about the crematorium. Old Wu was a talkative person. After I pulled him, he told me some of the secrets of the crematorium. After listening to his explanation, I understood that what he meant by earning money from the dead was actually making money from corpses. Nowadays, the country promoted cremation. People who died in their homes in the countryside could still be buried in the dark. However, people who were sent to the hospital were forcibly sent to the crematorium. Moreover, the corpses of people who died in car accidents or in criminal cases were all sent to the crematorium. It was said that when a person died, the light would go out. But in fact, after death, only the soul would disappear. The body they left behind was still very useful. Old Wu was just a security guard, but he could casually talk about the organ trade, teaching, and many other uses of corpses. Each of these uses involved a terrifying amount of money. These were the places he had mentioned to make money from the crematorium. Of course, the crematorium didn't have the right to deal with the corpses. However, the main problem was that he could deceive everyone. According to the crematorium's rules, when a dead person was placed in the furnace, outsiders couldn't watch. This gave the crematorium staff a chance to take action. Usually, the crematorium staff would secretly detain the corpses that were in good condition when they were alive. Then, they would pretend to burn them in the furnace. They would find some ashes from the deceased and put them in a jar. Then, they would send them to the crematorium. It was just like what Director Liu had said. No matter who they were, after they were burned, they would turn into ashes. No one would be able to tell them apart. Because of the entanglement of benefits, old Wu scoffed at my idea of managing the ashes of the corpses. The worst thing about crematoria was management. The more orderly they were, the more troublesome it would be to track them down. And the more chaotic it was, the more they could profit from it without any scruples. Chapter 175. After hearing old Wu's words, I couldn't help but be shocked. Director Liu's attitude of accepting money and messing around had already infuriated me. I never would have thought that compared to the truth behind the scenes, what I encountered was nothing. After receiving money, not only would they not give you the corpses of your relatives, they would even sell the corpses away. They would either remove the organs or sell them to a medical school for students to dissect. If the relatives of these corpses knew what had happened, they would probably want to burn down the crematorium. I was in this state right now. It was like my heart was on fire, and I only had one thought in my mind. Did they sell my parents' corpses and ruin them? My eyes turned red as I thought about it. I couldn't wait any longer. I forced myself to calm down. After thinking about it, I said to old Wu, "Uncle Wu, do you have a way to bring me inside?" Old Wu was stunned at first, then he asked me, "Why do you want to go inside?" Then, he seemed to have understood something. He stared at me and asked, "Kid, did you just get a family member sent here?" I didn't say anything, but I couldn't hide my expression at all. Old Wu jumped up from his chair, as if he was stung by a scorpion. He waved his hands at me and said, "No, no, no, no matter what you say, it won't work. Kid, why don't you think about it? There are so many benefits here. Is it something a normal person can get involved with? The people here all have eyes and ears. If you barge in carelessly, I can guarantee that you won't even know how you died." After saying that, he even took a few steps back, as if he wanted to show that he wouldn't help. However, after taking a few steps, he couldn't bear it anymore. He turned around and advised me, "Kid, let me give you a piece of advice. The weak can't beat the strong. Just pretend that you don't know about this. No matter what, the living are more important than the dead." I stood there and didn't say anything, but my face was extremely gloomy. Old Wu clearly knew the severity of the situation, that's why he had such a big reaction. If it was before I lost my powers, no matter how scary his words were, I wouldn't care. But now, it seems that entering the crematorium isn't as easy as I thought. However, I didn't want to wait any longer. It had been 2 months since my parents' corpses were sent here. If something really happened, I wouldn't have the time to hesitate. With that in mind, I decided not to think too much about it. Since sneaking in wasn't going to work, I might as well take this path. I wanted to barge in openly. It was true that my body hadn't recovered, but I still had Tong Tong. She was a Yin soul with the power of a ghost king. If she wanted to charge into the crematorium, how many people could stop her? Although this might cause some trouble in the future, I didn't mind it. It was nothing more than someone investigating me and then investigating the Metaphysics Association. If old President Li insisted on protecting me, what could he do in the end? After thinking for a while, I called Tong Tong in my mind. Then, I walked toward the gate of the crematorium. After walking a few steps, I realized that something was wrong. Tong Tong didn't come out of the jade bracelet and I didn't even get a response from her in my heart. What's going on? I stopped and called her a few more times, but there was still no response. Did something happen to Tong Tong? This time, I was completely bewildered. I stood there, not knowing what to do. At this moment, the security guard, Old Wu, chased after me. He pulled my arm and tried to persuade me. "Young man, don't be impulsive. Think about it. Do you think it was easy for your parents to raise you? Are they willing to see you destroy yourself because of this?" After a long time, I gave him a wry smile and nodded. "Uncle Wu, you don't need to persuade me. I understand everything. This crematorium, I won't go in today." Old Wu heaved a sigh of relief and nodded. "That's right." Then, he pulled me to talk for a long time. However, I wasn't in the mood to listen. My mind was filled with thoughts of Tong Tong and my parents' corpses. When I returned to the hotel at night, my heart was filled with despair. My parents were dead, and I had lost all of my Tao energy. Even so, I eventually got out of my depression and tried to pull myself together. But now, my parents' corpses might have been defiled, and I had lost contact with Tong Tong. I was really bewildered. Tong Tong was inside the jade bracelet, and I couldn't get in. Of course, even if I could, I didn't have the ability to save Tong Tong. As for my parents' corpses, I couldn't do anything about them. If I couldn't even get into an ordinary crematorium, what use would I have? I lay on the bed in a daze for the whole night. When the next morning came, my eyes were still staring at the ceiling. It was as though I had returned to my previous numb and silent state. However, when the sky brightened, I instantly got out of that state and sat up with a face full of surprise. It wasn't because I had figured it out, but because I saw Tong Tong. This time, she didn't talk to me. Instead, she walked out of the jade bracelet and stood next to my bed. I asked Tong Tong what had happened last night with a face full of surprise. However, before I could ask, I saw that Tong Tong's body was covered in small wounds. How did she get hurt? Could it be that something really happened last night? I furrowed my eyebrows, but Tong Tong's lips curled up as she smiled happily. She skipped in front of me. With one hand behind her back, she extended her other hand and pressed it against my eyes. With a slightly weak voice, she said to me, "Big brother, close your eyes. I want to give you a present." I didn't understand what she was doing, but Tong Tong had always been a considerate person. No matter what she did, she definitely wouldn't harm me. Thus, I happily closed my eyes and waited for Tong Tong's present to be revealed. Very quickly, I felt an ice-cold sensation on my palm. When I couldn't help but open my eyes, I instantly exclaimed. At this moment, there was a drop of milky white liquid in my palm. It was the drop that I had seen on the true dragon vein. It was the true dragon saliva that Grandpa Lee had said could instantly restore my meridians. I raised my head and asked Tong Tong excitedly, "Didn't you say that this true dragon saliva would harm you greatly? Why did you take it out? You didn't come out last night because you were taking this drop of true dragon saliva, right?" After asking, I realized that although Tong Tong was smiling at me, her entire body seemed to be shivering. Her body seemed to be a little illusory. It should be known that Tong Tong's power was close to that of a ghost king. Her body had solidified a long time ago. How could it be like this? I immediately knew the answer to my previous question. It must be because I had told her about the true dragon saliva. Tong Tong didn't say anything, but she remembered it. No wonder I had felt a little weak when she had helped me simulate the ancestral seeking talisman a few days ago. Now that I thought about it, she must have tried to take the true dragon saliva back then. What a silly girl. I looked at Tong Tong and my heart ached for her. I pulled her into my embrace and asked her, "Did it hurt when you took the true dragon saliva?" Tong Tong still had a smile on her face. She tilted her head and pondered for a while. Then, she said, "It hurt a little, but when I thought that brother needed it, Tong Tong didn't feel any pain anymore." It was obviously a pretentious and emotional story, but Tong Tong said it so naturally. I couldn't help but feel sorry for her. I wanted to talk to her a little longer, but after hugging her, I could feel her shivering body. I knew her condition wasn't good. I hurried to ask her to return to the jade bracelet to swallow the souls to recover her body. After Tong Tong returned to the jade bracelet, my eyes moved to the milky white liquid. Anyone who had studied physics in middle school would know that gravity had an effect on all objects. However, this tiny drop of liquid didn't seem to be affected by gravity. It slowly floated above my palm, giving me a warm and cool feeling. It was really strange. Grandpa Lee had told me that as long as I took this drop of true dragon saliva, my body would recover completely. Chapter 176. This true dragon saliva was very strange. When I held it in my palm, I felt a warm and cool sensation. However, after I swallowed it, the cool sensation turned into a scorching heat. I even felt a burning sensation in my mouth. I couldn't help but spit it out. Of course, I didn't do that. Instead, I fiercely closed my mouth and swallowed the saliva. As the true dragon saliva entered my stomach, the burning sensation became even more intense. However, at the same time, a wave of Dao Qi seemed to surge out of nowhere in my body. This Dao Qi was extremely vast. It was even several times larger than the 5 apertures of Dao Qi in my heavenly meridian. As soon as this huge flow of Dao Qi appeared, it wreaked havoc in my body. It was so painful that my bones, joints, and even my muscles and tendons were constantly making small noises. However, after experiencing that kind of despair, I could still endure this pain. I clenched my teeth and lay on the bed, my body constantly shivering. I didn't know how long it had been, but the burning sensation in my body suddenly disappeared. It left as quickly as it had come. After that, the intense pain also disappeared. What replaced it was a warm and comfortable feeling that came from the cracks in my bone. I lay there and didn't want to move at all. However, I quickly moved and jumped up from the bed. I was so excited that I almost screamed. That's because I can already feel the Taoist qi lingering in the surroundings. I closed my eyes to absorb it for a while. However, I felt that it was too slow, so I took out the dark green bead and greedily absorbed the dragon qi from it. Then, I converted it into Tao qi in my body. During the absorption process, I could clearly feel that the 8 extraordinary meridians and the heavenly meridians had been restored to their original state. There were no longer any blockages or adhesions. Not only that, but even the parts that were slightly blocked in the meridians had been completely cleared at this moment. The qi of Tao circulated in the body seemed to be faster and smoother. Although the 5 apertures of Tao qi in my body had disappeared, the first 5 apertures of the heaven meridian were still enshrouded in a faint light. I had a vague understanding that as long as I absorbed enough Tao qi, the strength of the 5 apertures would be completely restored. I was so excited that I dropped my jaw. I didn't have any scruples anymore. I sat on the edge of the bed and laughed crazily. Back then, when I was lonely and desperate, I would never have thought that in just 2 months, the mountain that almost made me collapse and seek death would be pushed away so easily. As I laughed, tears rolled down my cheeks and covered my mouth and face. I sat there like a mad woman, crying hysterically, laughing sadly. Soon, the hotel owner came knocking on the door. Rather than knocking, it was more accurate to say that he was pounding on the door. As he pounded on the door, he scolded me, telling me to go crazy and do it outside instead of in the hotel. I didn't pay attention to him and went to the bathroom to wash my face. When I came out, there were no tears on my face. I couldn't hide the joy in my eyes. I opened the door and gave all the money in my wallet to the owner. He was so scared that he didn't dare to take it. When I smiled and told him that I had won 5 million, the owner took the money with a strange expression and left in a hurry. I didn't rush to the crematorium. Although I was anxious, I had only recovered my meridians. My power was still much lower than before. Moreover, my eyes wouldn't recover in the next few days. It wasn't a good time to barge into the crematorium. I sat on the bed again and grabbed the dark green pillar with both hands. I started to absorb the dragon energy from it. As I completed the heavenly meridians, the Tao qi in my body became more active. It seemed that it would increase by 1 realm every 1 or 2 hours. At the beginning, I could draw the Tao qi like a thread. Then, I could draw the Tao qi like a pillar. After breaking through to the piercing acupoint realm, the Tao qi in my meridians became more condensed. I felt it all over again, as if it had never happened before. A day and a night had passed. I didn't step out of the room during this period of time. I didn't stop absorbing the dragon's energy, causing the surroundings to emit a mysterious fluctuation of dragon's energy. If it was a normal person, after standing in this room for a few minutes, they would definitely become much more intelligent than before. After absorbing for 1 day and 1 night, the Tao qi in my body had finally recovered. Not only that, but the 5th acupuncture point on my heaven meridian was half filled with Tao qi. My cultivation base had advanced a little compared to when I was injured. I exhaled deeply and woke up from my cultivation. At the same time, I had finally calmed down after being excited for 1 night and 1 night. I slowly regained my composure. After my power was restored, I had to find my parents' ashes. I thought for a while, then got up and left the hotel. I found something to eat and went to the crematorium. It was midnight, and the crematorium was very quiet. Occasionally, a patrol light would flash, which looked like a will-o'-the-wisp. It made people shiver. Of course, it didn't scare me. I walked around the front door and found a wall. I used my Tao qi to sense it. After confirming that there was no one around, I lifted my foot and jumped in. I didn't know where I was in the crematorium, so I had to use my Tao qi to sense the yin energy in the air. Then, I went to the place with the thickest yin energy. Along the way, I kept bumping into patrolmen with dogs and flashlights. Some of them had batons, while others had bulges on their waists. Although I couldn't see them from the outside, Their postures made me think that they carried guns with them. Old Wu was right. The people in the crematorium weren't easy to deal with. If an ordinary person came here, he or she would die a horrible death. Unfortunately, I wasn't an ordinary person. Regardless of whether it was these patrolling people or the dogs in their hands, under the effect of my Dao Qi, they couldn't sense my aura at all. Sometimes, even when I brushed past them, they wouldn't be able to detect me. As I walked, I soon arrived at a huge warehouse. Before I even entered, I could feel a chill just by standing at the entrance. This place was where the crematorium stored the corpses. The thick yin energy here had been accumulating for a long time. It had transcended a certain realm and turned into a bone-chilling cold. The temperature here was at least 7 or 8 degrees lower than in other places. I stood there and observed. Soon, I found that there were guards at the entrance of the warehouse. What surprised me even more was that I actually discovered a faint fluctuation of Dao Qi from the two people who were on duty. They were from the metaphysics world. Although they were just two geomancy masters at the early stage of the dragon-seeking realm, and at the qi-drawing flow like silk realm, I was still shocked. As a feng shui master, especially those who had already reached the geomaster realm, although they were not considered much in the world of metaphysics, in the world of ordinary people, no matter what, they would still be at the level of a feng shui master. As long as these people were willing, it was hard to say if they were rich, but their income would definitely not be small. But now, two geomancy masters at this level were guarding this warehouse. How big of a business does the crematorium have? How could they hire these kinds of people? I suppressed the doubts in my heart and observed for a while. After confirming that there was nothing wrong, I slowly walked out. When I was in front of the two people, I waved my hand. The two of them didn't have time to react and instantly fainted. "That's right," I said with a smile, "that's right." Then, I found the key and opened the warehouse door. After the door was opened, a cold and sinister aura came. However, I circulated my Dao Qi and dissolved it instantly. It was worthy of being the crematorium's cold warehouse. I lifted my head and saw many rows of corpses. All of them had ferocious eyes. I didn't know how long they had been dead. Although I had seen many dead people in the past few years, I still felt uncomfortable. I moved my eyes to the side and carefully closed the warehouse door. Then, I took out the ancestral-seeking talisman to find my parents' ashes. However, right at this moment I felt another wave of Dao Qi. This wave of Dao Qi was much stronger than the two people outside the door. It was at least at the acupuncture realm. The acupuncture realm was different from the dragon-seeking realm. With the acupuncture realm, one could be considered a mid-level character in the metaphysics world. The previous two dragon-seeking realm experts could be said to be the crematorium's helpers. However, when the acupuncture realm expert appeared, my first thought was that the metaphysics world was involved in the conspiracy behind the crematorium. My heart tightened. I didn't dare to use the ancestral-seeking talisman for the time being. I quietly sensed the direction of the Dao Qi wave. Chapter 177. The crematorium's cold storage was huge. Every 4 to 5 meters there was a row of corpses. They were either hanging there or lying on stretchers. In this 100-meter-long warehouse, there were at least 200 to 300 corpses. This place was a county-level crematorium. I guessed that all the corpses received in the past 1 or 2 months were here. While walking, I checked the corpses and tried to find my parents. However, after walking for dozens of meters, I didn't find anything. However, the fluctuation of Dao energy in front of me was getting stronger. Moreover, I vaguely heard people talking. I became more cautious. I held my breath and walked forward a dozen more steps. Soon, I saw an open space not far from me. 3 or 4 people were standing there. The voices were coming from that place. I looked around and saw a row of hanging corpses not far from that open space. I hurried to go there and pulled apart some of the corpses' legs. Then, I hid my body and peeked through the gap between the legs. There were 4 people standing there. One of them was Director Liu, whom I had met a few days ago. He stood on the left side of the open space. Next to him were 2 young men wearing the crematorium's uniform. They seemed to be Director Liu's subordinate. On the other side of the open space stood a skinny young man. He looked about the same age as me. The fluctuation of Tao energy I had sensed earlier came from him. As I got closer, I could clearly feel that his cultivation base was at the early stage of the pressure point realm, which was around 1 to 2 apertures. In addition to the fluctuation of Tao Qi, I could also feel a very strong Yin Qi on his body. This Yin Qi wasn't the pure Yin Qi that Tong Tong had. Instead, it had an evil feeling. It was a bit like the elder of the ghost-raising sect, Liang Kaixiong, whom I had met before. In addition to these 4 people, there were 10 corpses neatly arranged on the ground not far from their feet. All of them were tightly wrapped in body bags. At this moment, the fat Director Liu was smiling at the young man with the gloomy face. "Mr. Wei, the 10 corpses you pointed out are all here. Do you want to take a look?" The young man's face was expressionless as he coldly shook his head and said, "No need, I have already checked. You can send these bodies to the car outside and then you can leave." After that, the young man casually glanced at the corpses, then pushed open a small door not far from him and left the warehouse. Then, Director Liu directed 2 of his subordinates to move the 10 corpses one by one to a freight truck outside. I thought for a while and understood. The young man with the surname Wei had the evil aura of the ghost-raising sect. He must have practiced some evil technique that required corpses. That was why he came to the crematorium to buy it. I had little to do with it. I stared for a moment to make sure my parents were not among the 10 bodies, and then I slipped back to the back. When the young man was here, I was worried that he would notice that I had used the ancestral seeking talisman. Now that he had left the cold storage, I didn't have to worry anymore. I walked to a place where Director Liu and the others couldn't see me and took out the ancestral seeking talisman that I had prepared. After receiving the Tao Qi, I patted it on my body. Following my action, the ancestral seeking talisman quickly turned into ashes. A gray aura appeared on my body and circled around me once before it flew far away and dissipated in the air. I frowned again. The ancestral seeking talisman was the same as it had been a few days ago. It had disappeared into the distance. This proved that my parents' corpses were not nearby. After searching for a long time, I couldn't help but feel annoyed. I frowned and pondered for a while before walking in the direction of Director Liu. Coincidentally, when I walked over, the 2 young men were still moving the corpses. Director Liu seemed to have nothing to do as he strolled in my direction. I silently moved to his side and waved my hand. I used my Tao Qi to seal his nose and mouth before grabbing him and dragging him to the back of the warehouse. Because Director Liu couldn't breathe, his body continuously struggled. However, he couldn't struggle at all in my hand. He couldn't even make a sound. After dragging him far away from the empty space, I threw him down and retracted my Tao Qi from his nose and mouth. I said to him, "Director Liu, we meet again." When he heard what I said, he was stunned. He raised his head and his expression instantly changed. He took 2 steps back and trembled as he asked, "You? What do you want?" I coldly said, "You should know that I'm here to look for my parents' corpses. Last time, you weren't willing to help me investigate. I wonder if Director Liu has the time this time." My voice was cold. Director Liu shivered and nodded. Then, he pulled a long face and said, "It's not that I don't want to help you, but the crematorium's management is too messy. They don't keep any records. I can't find anything even if I want to." Then, as he was afraid that I would misunderstand, he hurried to explain, "There are many opportunities for us to do something. That's why we don't keep any records. If we wait for a long time, we won't be able to find anything. Should I ask someone to help me search this cold storage room?" The The corpses here are all of the better quality that have been collected in the past month. What he said should be true. Old Wu had told me the same thing. I kept silent for a while, then shook my head. I've checked this place. Let me ask you, where are the ashes stored in the crematorium? Also, tell me where the crematorium furnace is. Director Liu hurried to stand up and gestured to me. The ashes are stored in a small building on the north side of the warehouse. The crematorium furnace is in a factory area on the south side of the cold storage room. There's a tall chimney there, so it's easy to find. I nodded and waved my hand. Under the effect of my Taoist energy, I knocked him out. Then, I left through the door of the warehouse and headed to the small building where the ashes were stored. When I arrived, I didn't go in. I stood below the building and used the ancestral searching talisman again. However, I didn't find anything. Helpless, I found the crematorium furnace on the south side and used the ancestral searching talisman for the third time. The result was the same as the previous 2 times. This time, I furrowed my brows. The first 2 times I used the ancestral searching talisman, it only proved that my parents' corpses weren't in the cold storage room or the small building. However, the third time I used the ancestral searching talisman was in the crematorium furnace. Although my parents were sent here 2 months ago, as long as they passed through the crematorium furnace, there would be some aura left. The ancestral searching talisman was very sensitive to the aura of the ancestors. As long as there was a little aura left, the ancestral searching talisman would react. If that was the case, my parents weren't cremated. Since they weren't cremated and their corpses weren't in the cold storage room, the answer was obvious. Those bastards had sold my parents' corpses. A ball of anger rose in my heart. I returned to the cold storage room. Although I had to walk around the crematorium and the crematorium furnace, I was fast. Until now, the 2 people in front of the cold storage room were still unconscious. Inside the cold storage room, Director Liu, whom I had knocked out not long ago, was also unconscious. I used my Taoist energy to isolate him. Then, I kicked him to wake him up. Where do you sell the corpses in the crematorium? Who is that young man surnamed Wei? Director Liu was a coward. After seeing my tricks, he didn't dare to hide anything. The corpses in the crematorium are usually sold for organs or for research purposes. I don't know who that young man surnamed Wei is. However, my superior has ordered me to cooperate with him and take all the corpses out of the crematorium. That young man can pick whatever he wants. That young man would come here once a month. Each time, he would take 10 corpses, no more or less. Except for that, he didn't know anything else about that young man. Although I was curious about that young man surnamed Wei, the most important thing now was to find my parents' corpses. However, after I asked him again, Director Liu said, organs are usually sold from the corpses that aren't dead yet. My parents aren't among them. Moreover, the corpses sold for research purposes were all young corpses. Old corpses weren't worth much. It was possible that the young man surnamed Wei had taken my parents' corpses the last time he came here. After thinking about this, I was even angrier. Although my parents' corpses would be humiliated if they were sold for research purposes, as long as I could get them back, it wouldn't affect me much. However, that young man surnamed Wei had a mysterious background. If he had taken my parents' corpses, it was hard to imagine what he had experienced after that. I angrily kicked Director Liu's lower abdomen. He screamed in pain and fainted. Not only that, under the effect of my Tao energy, the nerves in his lower limbs were completely destroyed. From now on, he could only be a cripple with his lower limbs paralyzed. After punishing him, I returned to the empty space with a dark face. At this moment, the 2 young subordinates of Director Liu had just finished moving the corpses. They were looking for Director Liu. I walked over and used my Tao energy to break one of their legs. Then, I walked out of the other door and found the truck parked outside. The truck was starting to move. It seemed it was about to leave this place. Moreover, I could sense that the man surnamed Wei was in the front compartment. After thinking for a while, I walked forward and carefully opened the latch at the back of the truck. Before the truck started to move, I opened the door and jumped in. If it was possible that this man surnamed Wei had taken my parents' corpses, I would go with him. I wanted to see who he was. After entering the truck, it was just as I had expected. There were no guards inside. There were only 2 rows of corpses. I wanted to find a place to sit, but when I lifted my head to take a look, I was stunned. No matter what I had seen with my own eyes or what Director Liu had told me, this man surnamed Wei had taken 10 corpses. However, there were 11 corpses in the truck. How could there be one more? Chapter 178. There were no lights in the truck. After we closed the door, it was completely dark. However, with the help of my Tao energy, the darkness didn't affect me. I took a quick glance and found that one of the corpses looked strange. The 10 corpses I had just brought out were all wrapped in body bags. However, in this pile of corpses, there was one that wasn't wrapped in a body bag. It was wearing clothes. Did this Mr. Wei go to another place to search for corpses before coming to the crematorium? As soon as this thought popped up in my head, I immediately denied it. This corpse was different from the other corpses. It was purplish-black and shriveled. It didn't look like a person who had just died. Moreover, the yin energy on this corpse was much thicker than that of ordinary corpses. I studied it for a long time but couldn't find anything. I walked forward and lowered my head to check. However, as soon as I got close to the corpse, it suddenly jolted up from the ground. This sudden change startled me. I hurriedly retreated. Instinctively, I used the square sky fan on my body to defend myself. I thought that my action was unnecessary. However, the dried corpse was really fast. After it stood up, it dashed toward me. In just a blink of an eye, it was in front of my face. Even with my speed, I didn't have time to react. Fortunately, I had the square sky fan. The wild grass on the lonely grave appeared and blocked the dried corpse, making it spin in circles. Otherwise, the dried corpse would have jumped on me. No matter how strong I was, I wouldn't have had a chance to use it. In the end, geomancy masters were only good at using Taoist technique. Their bodies were still weak. Although they could use Taoist energy instantly, it didn't have much power. It was effective against ordinary people, but it wasn't enough to deal with this dried corpse. I felt lucky and wiped my sweat. However, before I could put my hand down, I lifted my head to look at the dried corpse. I was bewildered. Just now I had thought that it was just a dried corpse with thick yin energy. Now, after it stood up, the yin energy it exuded was shockingly massive. It was almost as strong as my Tao energy. This was a zombie whose cultivation was comparable to the middle stage of the acupuncture point realm. In the world of metaphysics, there have always been sects that raise corpses. The people in these sects are almost the same as the people from the ghost-raising sect that I met before. It's just that one raises ghosts and the other raises corpses. Both sects are considered evil by the world of metaphysics. Of course, even though it was said to be an evil path, it wasn't that contradictory. It was just like the last time when I was being examined by the Metaphysics Association. When I said that I was raising a ghost, the others looked at me with disdain. The metaphysics world only looked at these evil paths with disdain. They felt that if they didn't walk the right path, they wouldn't be able to obtain the right result. Therefore, I am not surprised that a member of the corpse nurturing sect suddenly appeared. However, it is said that the members of these sects are struggling at death's door in some borderlands, just like the ghost nurturing sect's headquarters in Hong Kong. When did the corpse nurturing sect come to our central plains? Even though I was puzzled, this wasn't the time to think about it. As I channeled my Tao energy into the square heaven fan, I conjured the earth overturning seal with both hands. Although the earth overturning seal was specialized in suppressing ghosts, zombies and ghosts both belonged to the yin attribute. It was quite useful against zombies. With the completion of the last movement of my hands, the Tao Qi changed and finally condensed into a mysterious pattern. It slowly separated from my hands and formed a huge Tao Qi light seal on my fingertip. It soared into the sky and directly smashed towards the zombie. When I first used the earth overturning seal, it consumed a lot of Tao energy. However, now that I have a 5-apertured cultivation base, the Tao energy consumed by the earth overturning seal was nothing to me. Even if I were to use the square heaven fan and the earth overturning seal at the same time, I could still withstand it. The speed of the earth overturning seal was extremely fast. Almost at the same time that it left my hands, it suddenly appeared below the zombie's head and smashed down. As the zombie was trapped outside the lonely grave, it was already impatient. When it saw the earth overturning seal in the sky, it roared and clenched its right arm into a fist, smashing towards the earth overturning seal. With a bang sound, the two collided fiercely. The earth overturning seal, which was formed by pure Taoist qi, was shattered by the zombie in an instant. However, the earth overturning seal was able to fight against the existence of a ghost king like Jing Gui. Although the zombie was not purine, and the effect of the earth overturning seal might be slightly weaker, it was not something that the zombie could easily defeat. At the same time that the earth overturning seal collapsed, the zombie's right arm almost completely collapsed. The dried flesh exploded like pieces of rocks, even creating small holes in the metal walls around the truck. The earth overturning seal had replaced one of the zombie's arms, but it had also stimulated its ferocious nature. After the arm collapsed, it roared angrily and continued to rush forward. Although the square heaven fan's lonely grave painting could temporarily block it, the Tao energy in my body was flowing faster and faster. I sneered and immediately chanted another mysterious incantation. At the same time, I made another hand seal. This time, I used the pure yang divine incantation, which was as famous as the divine golden light incantation. It was one of the 8 great divine incantations of Taoism. The difference between the divine golden light incantation and the divine golden light incantation was that the pure yang divine incantation was an offensive divine incantation. When combined with the pure yang hand seal, it could condense the pure yang karmic fire, which was extremely destructive to all yin and evil beings. Due to its extraordinary power, this divine incantation could only be used when one reached the middle stage of the pressure point technique. Speaking of which, this was the first time I had used it. After 2 simple hand seals, the first ray of pure yang golden light suddenly appeared from the gaps between my index and middle fingers. As I continued to make hand seals, pure yang golden light continuously appeared from the gaps between my other fingers. When I was done, the golden light gathered on the tip of my middle finger, forming a small candle flame. The candle flame looked very fleeting, as though it could be extinguished by a gust of wind. However, according to the records in the death scripture, this candle flame was the pure yang karmic fire, which was condensed from pure yang energy. It contained an extremely terrifying temperature that could suppress all yin and evil beings. After the pure yang karmic fire was formed, I didn't hesitate and directly threw the candle flame forward. The small candle flame was like a Kongming lantern on a summer night, fluttering as it flew toward the zombie. At the same time, the zombie seemed to have instinctively felt the power of the pure yang karmic fire. Its originally angry expression instantly changed, and its withered, purplish-black face revealed fear. It turned around and hurriedly tried to escape. However, right at this moment, the weeds next to the grave suddenly grew crazily. In just a blink of an eye, the weeds had reached the zombie's feet and tightly bound them to the ground. The zombie fiercely jumped up and tried to break the weeds. However, the withered and thin weeds were terrifyingly tough. As soon as one of the weeds was broken, new weeds immediately grew to replace it. Even the most ordinary yin corpse was extremely strong. Not to mention this zombie whose cultivation base was comparable to the middle stage of the pressure point technique, Even a heavenly master wouldn't be able to defeat it in terms of strength. However, this seemingly ordinary weeds had completely restrained the zombie, rendering it unable to move. This scene was beyond my expectations. Previously, I didn't know that the square sky fan had such an effect. I guessed that it was a new ability that appeared after I reached the middle stage of the pressure point technique. After its legs were tied up, the zombie had no way to escape. The drifting pure yang karmic fire slowly arrived in front of it and finally landed on its shoulder. The golden light divine incantation had been able to resist the Ghost King's attack for a few seconds. Now that the pure yang karmic fire was even stronger, it wasn't something that the little zombie in the middle stage of the pressure point technique could resist. The moment the flame landed on its shoulder, it was like a spark meeting gasoline. With a loud boom, it burst into flames. In just a few seconds, the giant zombie's body had turned into a pile of ashes. At the same time, the small flame didn't vanish. It slowly rose from the pile of ashes and floated back to my body. Chapter 179. I stood in the carriage and didn't move. Although I had originally planned to secretly follow him, now that I had been exposed, I didn't need to conceal myself anymore. I stood there as I converted the pure yang karmic fire into Tao Qi and absorbed it into my body. At the same time, I waited for the young man with the surname Wei to come over. I had dealt with the middle stage zombie, so I didn't need to worry about this corpse breeder at the early stage. However, to my surprise, after the carriage stopped, the Tao energy from the young man surnamed Wei didn't move closer to me. Quite the contrary, it moved further away from me. I was a little dumbfounded. That fellow was decisive. As soon as he found that something was wrong, he didn't even try to fight me. He just turned around and ran. It was rare to see such a despicable person in the metaphysics world. This time, I didn't have time to absorb the pure yang karmic fire. I kicked the door open and chased after that man. As for the whereabouts of my parents' remains, I would have to rely on this person to uncover the mystery. Moreover, I had killed this person's zombie. Who knew if he would come to take revenge? After experiencing Lu Zhenyang's matter, I had developed a cautious personality. I decisively made a quick hand seal and jumped out of the carriage. I ran as fast as I could. My cultivation base was much higher than his, so I thought I could catch up with him. However, half a minute later, I gawked. That man's speed was frighteningly fast. When I jumped out of the carriage, he was only a few dozen meters away from me. However, I had been chasing him for more than a minute. Not only had I not shortened the distance between us, but I had also fallen further behind. That corpse breeder must have some secret technique to increase his speed. Otherwise, with his cultivation base, he couldn't be faster than me. While I was at my wit's end, Tong Tong's voice arose in my mind. "Brother, I'll help you chase after him." I was bewildered. Tong Tong's body had recovered that fast? Before I could ask, Tong Tong turned into a jet of black energy and flew out of the jade bracelet. She directly chased after the corpse breeder. Her speed astonished me. I couldn't even see the black aura that she had transformed into. I turned into a black ray of light and shot out like lightning. It only took a few seconds to cover a distance of 100 meters. She had actually caught up to me. After she came to a stop, she reverted to her original form. She raised her hands slightly, and two thin streams of snake-like black chi surged forth from the tips of her middle fingers. Like two black chains, they shot toward the corpse breeder with the surname Wei. The corpse breeder wanted to dodge and run. However, the speed of the black energy was just as fast as Tong Tong had shown. Before the corpse breeder could react, the black energy had already coiled around his ankles. Seeing that there was no hope of escape, the corpse breeder stopped moving. He suddenly took out a black skull-like object from his hands and threw it into the air. At the same time, he spat a mouthful of blood on the withered skull. After being stained with blood, the skull suddenly burst out with a blood-red glow and directly exploded in front of Tong Tong. My heart tightened. I was worried that something bad would happen to Tong Tong. I quickened my pace and dashed toward her. At this moment, Tong Tong waved her hand, and a thin black light curtain appeared in front of her to block the skull's explosion. Then, the black threads between her middle fingers moved faster. In just a blink of an eye, they extended from the corpse breeder's feet to his body. Not only did they bind his body, but they also bound his hands. When I arrived, the corpse breeder was tied up like a rice dumpling. He was lying on the ground, his face full of humiliation. I was overjoyed. Spirits and zombies, when compared to people of the same level in the metaphysics world, were actually slightly inferior. This was because they could only rely on their natural talents and didn't have any divine powers. Humans, on the other hand, had too many divine powers that they could use. For example, the pure yang fire that I had just used. Not to mention a zombie of the same level as me, I was confident that I could fight against a zombie at the peak of the pressure point realm or even at the glory of consciousness realm. Therefore, although Tong Tong's realm was higher than the corpse breeder's, I was still a little worried. However, I didn't expect that Tong Tong would be able to deal with him so easily. I stopped and squatted down. Just as I was about to interrogate him, he asked with an unconvinced expression, "Fellow Taoist, you have a good plan. First, you attacked my corpse puppet, then you attacked me. Since when did the ghost breeder sect have the guts to attack a disciple of the corpse sect?" I was surprised. Then, I understood that it was because of Tong Tong that he thought I was a member of the ghost breeder sect. However, what is this corpse sect he mentioned? Is that the name of their corpse breeder sect? My heart became heavy. I had considered this problem before. If the corpse breeder was the only one selling corpses, then it wouldn't be difficult to find my parents' remains. However, if this person represented a sect, then it would be hard to say. The difficulty of finding my parents' remains would increase by several levels. A corpse breeder at the early stage of the acupoint sealing realm sure talks big. Even if you and your corpse puppet are together, what can you do? As I spoke, I gathered my Tao energy and revealed my middle stage acupoint sealing realm cultivation. The corpse breeder surnamed Wei finally shut his mouth and didn't say anything else. Tong Tong's cultivation was at the late stage of the acupoint sealing realm, and I was at the middle stage of the acupoint sealing realm. He and his corpse puppet, one at the early stage and the other at the middle stage, were simply not enough. I lowered my head and coldly asked him, "The people of your corpse breeder sect brought back corpses from the crematorium to refine them into corpse puppets, right?" The corpse breeder pondered for a moment and then sneered. "It's true that your cultivation is higher than mine, but your ghost breeder sect is only a subordinate sect of our corpse sect. If you delay the selection of corpses and the sect investigates, you won't be able to bear the consequences with your cultivation." These words made me frown. The ghost breeder sect is a subordinate sect of the corpse sect? How come I have never heard of it? In the world of metaphysics, I have never heard of this corpse sect. However, the ghost breeder sect is quite famous, and they have a Heaven's Master Realm Grand Supreme Elder. Why would they be a subordinate of the corpse sect? I didn't believe him and felt that this person was just trying to scare me. Thus, I sneered and said, "What corpse sect? I wonder if the Grand Supreme Elder, Liang Tianxin, would agree to be your subordinate sect?" "Liang Tianxin?" The corpse breeder also laughed. "Summer insects can't talk about ice." "Yes, he is the Grand Supreme Elder, but what does he count for in our corpse sect?" I was a bit intimidated by him. After pondering for a moment, I decided not to argue with him any more and directly asked, "I'm not interested in your sect's matters. I just want to know, last month, or the month before last, were you the one who came to the crematorium to collect corpses?" He nodded. "Of course it was me." "Good, then I'll ask you again. Did you see the corpses of an old couple at that time?" After asking, I gave him a rough description of my parents' appearance. The corpse breeder sneered again. When we choose corpses, we only look at the material. Who would pay attention to the appearance? Even if there were corpses of this old couple, so what? What can you do to a person chosen by our corpse sect with your small acupoint sealing realm cultivation? At this time, I finally felt that something was wrong. At this time, his life was completely in my hands, so where did his confidence come from? Could it be that this corpse sect was really some kind of great hidden sect? In reality, there were many hidden sects that were even more frightening than the ones on the surface, but so what? No matter how strong the sect was, what did it have to do with this corpse breeder surnamed Wei? There were too many lice, there was no itch. I had already offended the Liu family, so what if there was another corpse sect? My heart became even colder. This person didn't know the difference between life and death, so I could only kill him and search his soul. This matter was related to my parents, so I didn't care about killing this person. However, the only problem was that the soul-searching hand seal wasn't omnipotent. If there was a restriction in the other party's soul, there was a chance that the soul-searching hand seal would fail. If that happened, the clues would be cut off, and it would be hard to say if I could find the corpse sect again. Chapter 180. After carefully thinking about it, the cold expression on my face disappeared. Instead, I revealed a smile and said to the corpse breeder, "Fellow Taoist should be surnamed Wei, right? Brother Wei, I won't hide it from you. The pile of corpses I just mentioned is my parent. As a son, if I can't even protect the corpses of my parents, then it would be disloyal and unfilial. That's why I have no intention of becoming enemies with your corpse sect. I just want to find my parents' corpses." Hearing me say this, the corpse breeder, who didn't have a trace of fear on his face, laughed. He even had a trace of ridicule on his face and said, "In our corpse sect, corpses are more important than people. Since your parents' corpses were chosen, it's very likely that they have been refined into corpse puppet. The chances of you finding them are not high." He seemed to be deliberately suppressing his desire. After saying that, he didn't wait for me to reply and immediately continued, "Of course, if I can help you put in a few words, the result might be different." After he said this, I also revealed a trace of ridicule. However, I still pretended to be pleasantly surprised and said, "If that's the case, then it couldn't be any better. I'll have to trouble Brother Wei." The corpse breeder nodded and said with a hint of arrogance, "Since that's the case, why don't you quickly undo the restriction on my body?" I hesitated for a moment and deliberately put on an apologetic expression. I cupped my hands and said with a wry smile, "Brother Wei, you have reached the pressure point realm. Once I undo the restriction, what will I do if Brother Wei tries to escape? It's not that I don't trust Brother Wei, but this matter is too important to me." Hearing my words, the corpse breeder's expression became gloomy and he said with displeasure, "You don't trust me, yet you want me to help you? How can there be such a good thing in this world? I might as well not take you to the corpse sect. If you want to kill me, you can do whatever you want." The corpse breeder looked like he was ready to fight to the death, so I quickly persuaded him for a long time. I promised him that as soon as we arrived outside the corpse sect, I would immediately undo the restriction on his body. Then, he would take me to the corpse sect to find my parents' corpses. The corpse breeder begrudgingly agreed. He looked as if he had suffered a big loss. However, I could see a hint of ridicule on his face. Of course, I didn't put it in my heart. I just brought him back to the van. After we got into the car, I asked Tong Tong to loosen some of the restrictions on the corpse breeder's body. He could drive easily, but he couldn't use the Tao energy in his body. We continued our journey, heading northeast. After more than 2 hours, we entered Pingding County. We drove for another dozen kilometers before we reached the western entrance of Taihang Mountain. At the same time, it was also the pass of the Great Wall, the Nyangzi Pass. After they arrived, the corpse breeder drove off the national highway and arrived at a dirt road with many twists and turns. After another half-hour of bumpy driving, we finally stopped in front of a steep mountain wall. The corpse breeder slowly got out of the carriage and pointed at the mountain wall in front of us. He said, "There is a small path behind this mountain wall. We must follow this path. Once we climb over this mountain, we will arrive at the corpse sex headquarters. Can you remove the restrictions on my body now?" I didn't answer him and just looked at the mountain in front of us. At the same time, I used my Tao energy to sense it. It seemed he was right. The mountain was Yang, and the forest was Yin. The mountain in front of us looked barren, which was the pattern of solitary Yang. It should have a lot of Yang energy, but just by standing at the foot of the mountain, I could feel a strong Yin energy fluctuation. This proved that there was something strange on this mountain or behind it. I had read in a history textbook that there were several ancient trade routes in Taihang Mountain. They were hidden in the middle of several mountain ranges. Later, in different dynasties, many bandits and robbers gathered here, and it was impossible to eliminate them all. Just like the 10,000 mountains in Xiangxi, this place was also a famous bandit lair in history. I guessed that behind this steep mountain wall was one of these ancient trade routes. This kind of special terrain could provide a place for secluded sects to live. Moreover, it was a place that was secretive enough to ensure that no one knew about them. With that thought in mind, I guessed that the corpse breeder wasn't lying. The mountain road is rugged. I'm afraid it won't be easy to carry the 10 corpses in the carriage up the mountain. Brother Wei, how did you carry the corpses up the mountain? After observing the terrain, I asked the corpse breeder with a smile. The corpse breeder's face turned cold. He looked at me with more resentment. After a long time, he took a deep breath and answered, "Corpse puppets are very strong. When we used to climb the mountain, we had to rely on them to carry the corpses. This time, my corpse puppet died in your hands. We have to rely on ourselves to carry the corpses." I could see that the corpse puppet was very important to this corpse breeder. Otherwise, he wouldn't have such a big grudge against me. However, it made sense. This corpse breeder was at the early stage of the acupoint sealing realm, while the corpse puppet was at the middle stage of the acupoint sealing realm. That corpse puppet should be his biggest trump card. Then, before I could answer, the corpse breeder said, "All right, you should remove my restriction. We'll have to exert our strength. Each of us will be responsible for 5 corpses. Let's go up the mountain." I still didn't answer him. Instead, I laughed and said, "It's true that the corpse puppets are strong, but Brother Wei, you've forgotten about the talisman techniques of our Xianmen sect. Let's not talk about other things. Even the godly techniques used by some villagers can make them extremely strong, let alone the Taoist school's Mao summoning technique. You only need a low-level Mao summoning technique to carry these 10 corpses. How hard is it to carry them?" After saying that, I took out 2 talismans from my body. Although the summoning thatch technique is the most commonly used talisman, the death scripture even has records of the 8 great Taoist mantras, let alone this commonly used summoning thatch technique. The 2 low-grade summoning thatch technique talismans I have are also talismans that I usually keep on hand. The corpse breeder turned his head and lowered his head. He didn't say anything, but the cold gleam in his eyes became thicker. I chuckled and acted as if I hadn't seen anything. After receiving the Tao Qi, I placed the 2 talismans on both of our bodies. In an instant, I felt a surge of Qi rising from my body, filling my limbs and bones with enormous power. Although the corpse breeder still had the Yin energy restriction on his eyes, it didn't conflict with the Mao summoning talismans. Under the effect of the Mao summoning talismans, he became extremely strong. Then, I opened the door of the carriage and tied the corpses wrapped in the body bags together. Then, we each carried 5 corpses and headed up the mountain. Just like the corpse breeder had told me, we walked around the mountain wall and crossed another mountain. It wasn't until nightfall that we reached a mountain stream at the foot of the mountain. The mountain stream covered a large area. It was as big as an ordinary village. However, it was strange that there were only a few dilapidated and abandoned houses in the mountain stream. I didn't see anyone there. It didn't take long for me to find something strange. The yin energy in the mountain stream was very thick, but with the help of my Taoist energy, I could see that the source of the yin energy in the mountain stream was a winding river in the distance, and this small river flowed out of a seemingly huge cave in a zigzag manner. The corpse sect that the corpse breeder had mentioned wasn't in this mountain stream, but in the cave where the river flowed. The corpse breeder's eyes were also gazing at the cave, which proved my point. I didn't wait for him to remind me. I turned my head and said with a smile, "Brother Wei, the corpse sect should be here, right? Put down the corpses on your body, and I'll undo the restriction for you." The corpse breeder's face lit up. He hurriedly threw the corpses on the ground and walked toward me. I smiled and slowly made a hand seal. However, it wasn't a hand seal to undo the restriction, but the pure yang soul seal that I had used earlier. As I made the hand seal, the pure yang karma flame that had returned to my body and hadn't dissipated yet emerged from my fingertip. I then pressed it on the corpse breeder's chest. Chapter 181. After the corpse breeder's body softened and collapsed, I quickly retrieved the pure yang karmic fire back into my body and used my Tao Qi to nourish it. Then, I formed a soul-searching seal and prepared to search his soul. This is what I calculated from the beginning. The corpse sect is a hidden sect. For this kind of sect, the location of the sect must be very hidden. Even the souls of the people in the sect are likely to have restrictions placed on them. Therefore, killing them and searching their souls won't guarantee that I can find the corpse sect. That was why I deliberately pretended to be polite to this corpse breeder, making him believe that I had something to ask of him and take the initiative to bring me here. From the very beginning, I could feel that this corpse breeder didn't know much about the ways of the world. He had been immersed in cultivation since he was a child and didn't have much contact with people. After I probed him, I found that he was indeed like that. After discovering that I had something to ask of him, he immediately agreed. Moreover, from time to time, he revealed a mocking smile. I guessed that he was planning to find someone to deal with me after arriving at the corpse sect. Unfortunately, this fellow's thoughts were too simple. He only wanted to scheme against me, but he didn't expect that I would use his scheming mind to achieve my own goal. Now that I had found the corpse sect, I didn't have to worry about killing someone and searching their soul. It would be good if I could find some valuable clues. Even if I couldn't, it wouldn't affect anything. Not long after, the soul-searching seal was formed in my hand, and I directly pressed it on the corpse breeder's body. This was the first time I had used the soul-searching seal. After I pressed my hand on the corpse, my Tao Qi turned into a gray mist that was similar to Yin Qi. However, it was different. Even with my current cultivation base, I couldn't completely understand it. In short, the gray fog instantly enveloped the corpse breeder's entire body, then directly penetrated his body's surface and immersed into his three souls. Around 3 minutes later, the gray mist suddenly rushed out of his body. This time, the color of the mist became darker and returned to my body at a faster speed. Then, fragments of memories crazily surged into my brain. I felt like I was watching a movie. I could vaguely see many scenes of the corpse breeder's life. From when he was young, his father took him to touch the first corpse. Then, he started to practice the sound testing technique. Then, he started to refine his own corpse puppet. All kinds of experiences were scattered in front of me. However, just as I had guessed, there were many things in his memory that were clearly restricted. They looked very vague, and I couldn't see them clearly. This included the location of the corpse sect. Fortunately, I thought too much and didn't kill him to search his soul. Otherwise, this clue would have been broken. However, aside from the location of the sect and the specific situation within the sect, I saw many other things in the corpse sect, including the corpse sex cultivation method. At first, I didn't think that there was anything special about this evil method of raising corpses. However, after a quick glance, I was startled. The disciples of the corpse sect only had one chance to refine a corpse in their lifetime, and they could only refine one corpse. This was the corpse puppet that the corpse cultivator was talking about. Once a corpse cultivator successfully refined a corpse puppet, it would never change for the rest of its life, even if the corpse puppet died. No wonder this corpse breeder with the surname Wei harbored such deep hatred towards me. I could feel it from the start. Judging from this cultivation method, killing his corpse puppet was equivalent to destroying the foundation of his cultivation for the rest of his life. Moreover, the reason he was able to boast shamelessly after being controlled by me was because he had confidence in the corpse sect. On the other hand, after the corpse puppet's death, he also had the thought of dying. As for why the corpse sex cultivation method surprised me, it was because I saw a legend about the corpse sect in the corpse cultivator surnamed Wei's memory. Although I had never heard of the corpse sect, it had a very long history. According to the legend, several hundred years ago, a dragon-seeking realm disciple of the corpse sect had a heavenly master corpse puppet by his side. In the cultivation of the corpse sect, one's own strength was one aspect, and the strength of the corpse puppet was another. One's own strength could only be slowly increased, but the corpse puppet could reach the heavens in a single bound. Although Tong Tong's cultivation was higher than mine, she was willing to stay by my side, so I couldn't control her. In fact, it was almost impossible for someone with a lower cultivation to control an otherworldly item with a higher cultivation. Just like when the Jing ghost was trapped by Tong Tong in the jade bracelet, I didn't even think about borrowing her power because I knew I couldn't control it. Unless I also reached the glorious knowledge realm, but to be honest, once I reached that realm, the Jing ghost wouldn't have much meaning to me. It would be of little value. However, the corpse sect wasn't like this. Their cultivation method was extremely overbearing. The corpse cultivator had complete control over the corpse puppet. Even after the refinement was successful, as long as the corpse puppet was a certain distance away from the corpse cultivator, it would lose all ability to move. With this kind of terrifying control, the corpse puppet's ability could be said to be the corpse cultivator's own ability. That was why that dragon-seeking realm corpse cultivator used his own corpse puppet to become the youngest elder in the history of the corpse sect. This made countless young corpse keepers envious. All of them dreamed that they could find such a corpse puppet. This included the corpse keeper surnamed Wei, whom I had searched his soul. Of course, it was almost impossible to find a corpse puppet at the Heavenly Master realm. However, the magical aspect of this cultivation method lay in another aspect. A person's talent was limited, and it was almost predetermined when they were born. It was very difficult to change, and the corpse puppet was a turning point. As long as one could find a corpse with excellent quality, even a mediocre corpse cultivator could use his corpse puppet to reach a position equal to a heavenly master. This was a chance to choose again. For those with mediocre talent, this cultivation method was simply a gift from the heavens. Of course, there were very few corpses with excellent talent, and finding one depended on luck. This was probably what the Book of Changes referred to as De Yan's number 1. I was also very interested in this cultivation method. Fortunately, although part of the cultivation method was hidden in the memories of the corpse cultivator surnamed Wei, the most basic things were still there. That was why I wasn't in a hurry to go to the cave near the water source after reading the corpse cultivator surnamed Wei's life. Instead, I sat there and slowly studied the cultivation method of the corpse sect. I could see that the cultivation method was divided into 3 parts. One was the refining technique, the second was the corpse puppet technique, and the last was the corpse controlling technique. The refining technique was actually the cultivation of Taoist energy. However, not much of the corpse sex Taoist energy had been transformed into energy. That was why it was called the refining technique. It was useless to me, so I directly threw it aside. As for the corpse puppet technique, it was a method to refine corpses into corpse puppets. I was very interested in it, so I immersed myself in studying it. After reading it, I was even more shocked. The death scripture had recorded that among the 3 souls and 7 spirits, the 3 souls were good while the 7 spirits were evil. Monsters like zombies were controlled by the 7 spirit. That was why the corpse sex corpse puppet refining technique was also a sacrificial formation that could be used to refine the 7 spirit. However, it was easy to sense the 3 souls, but the 7 spirits were illusory. With my current realm, I couldn't touch the 7 spirit. The consensus in the metaphysics world was that one could only study the 7 spirits after reaching the Heavenly Master realm. However, the corpse sex corpse puppet refining technique could only be studied after reaching the Earth Master realm, which was the dragon-seeking realm. It was incredible. After studying it for a long time, although I had learned the refining technique, I couldn't understand the principles behind it. It was too profound. Then, I turned my eyes to the third part, the corpse controlling technique. This part was much simpler and didn't involve the 7 spirits. It only recorded how to command zombies to fight and how to train them to increase their strength. It looked very ordinary. Such an ordinary technique was able to control a corpse puppet whose cultivation was much higher than his. The reason for this should be that the method of refining the corpse puppet was too exquisite. By the time I finished studying the 3 parts, most of the night had passed. I looked at the cave near the water source in the distance, and began to think about how to sneak in. My initial plan was to impersonate this Wei Samping. From his memories, I knew that this boy was a lonely person. His parents died early and he didn't have many friends in the corpse sect. Moreover, his body was very similar to mine. Most of the people in the corpse sect had energy covering their faces. As long as I was careful, it was possible to sneak in. However, the only problem was that the people of the corpse sect all had corpse puppets. Moreover, whether it was in daily life or during cultivation, corpse puppets were inseparable. If I wanted to impersonate this Wei Samping, I would have to make a corpse puppet. But where could I get a corpse puppet now? I frowned and looked at Wei Samping's corpse in front of me. An idea popped up in my mind. Since I had already obtained the corpse puppet refining technique, should I directly refine Wei Samping into my own corpse puppet? Chapter 182. After thinking about it, I was a little tempted. Although Orthodox Taoists despised the corpse-raising sect, it didn't matter to me. As long as it could increase my strength, I could accept it. As for good and evil, cultivation was just a method, and good and evil were actions. There was no necessary connection between the two. Tong Tong was a good example. Although she was a ghost, she was much kinder than most people. Vice President Su of the Shenzhen Metaphysics Society and Professor Deng, whom I had met at school, looked dignified, but what were they really like? The boundary between a human and a ghost couldn't be measured by these things. Next, I began to use the corpse puppet refining technique to slowly deal with the corpse. According to the corpse refining technique, to refine a corpse puppet, I had to first clean up the 3 souls of the corpse and turn it into a soulless corpse. Then, I had to use energy to nourish the corpse. After the energy had completely soaked the corpse, I had to carve the refining formation on the corpse. After these 3 steps, after a certain period of time, when the corpse stood up, the corpse puppet would be refined. The first 2 steps were simple, but the last step was the most important. Moreover, it was difficult to control the time. The time needed for the corpse to wake up was related to the innate talent of the corpse. Generally speaking, corpses that woke up within 7 days couldn't have the innate talent of a heavenly master. Only corpses that woke up after 7 days had the chance to become a heavenly master. Although Wei Samping's innate talent was good, it was impossible for him to become a heavenly master. Thus, it wouldn't take too long. Originally, I wanted to refine him into a corpse puppet, but after cleaning up his 3 souls, I became hesitant. On one hand, Wei Samping had a mission this time, and he came back with so many corpses. I had to report on time. I could explain it 1 or 2 days later, but if I was too late, I was afraid that the people of the corpse sect would punish me, and I would be exposed. On the other hand, I could only refine 1 corpse puppet. If I turned Wei Samping into a corpse puppet now, wouldn't I be wasting such a good opportunity to refine a corpse? A corpse puppet's power was great, which could be seen from Tong Tong's body. Previously, when I encountered the ghost king Jingui, I would have died without a burial place if I were alone. However, with Tong Tong and I working together, we were able to deal with the Jingui. If there was a corpse puppet that was as strong as Tong Tong, that Jingui wouldn't have been able to do anything to me. With that thought in mind, I was at a loss. If I didn't refine corpse puppets, I wouldn't be able to join the corpse sect. If I did, I would waste such a good opportunity. After a few minutes, I sighed. Finding my parents' corpses was more important. If I wasted this chance, I wouldn't mind wasting it. After making up my mind, I activated the Tao energy in my body and forced my blood out of my fingertip. I was going to use my blood to carve the formation to refine a corpse puppet on Wei Samping's body. However, at that moment, Tong Tong's voice suddenly sounded in my head. She asked me why I sighed. While I was drawing the formation, I told Tong Tong the reason behind it. After Tong Tong heard this, it suddenly came out of the jade bracelet. When she had captured Wei Samping, her body hadn't fully recovered. She looked a little weak. However, after staring at Wei Samping's corpse for a while, she smiled and said to me, "Brother, you don't need to refine him into a corpse puppet." I was surprised and asked, "What do you mean?" Tong Tong gestured with her hand and said, "After dealing with his corpse, it will look like a corpse puppet. Now we just need to control it." I nodded. Tong Tong was right. Among the 3 steps of refining a corpse puppet, the first 2 were dealing with the corpse, and the last one was controlling it. Now that I had completed the first 2 steps, only the last one was left. It's fine as long as we can control it. However, the most important thing right now is to refine it into a corpse puppet. Only then can I control it and not let the people of the corpse sect discover anything. After I said that, Tong Tong smiled even more happily. She pointed her chubby finger at herself and said, "Brother, you can't control it, but Tong Tong can. Zombies also have energy, and my heavenly energy can control them. I can even attach my heavenly energy to the zombie's body to fight with others. When the time comes, you just need to tell me what you want it to do." After Tong Tong said that, my eyes suddenly lit up. Yes, Tong Tong was a heavenly embryo, and her strength was far greater than Wei Samping's when he was alive. Controlling his corpse wouldn't be a problem. This way, I could get the best of both worlds and solve my problem. I hugged Tong Tong and kissed her. Then I happily said, "Tong Tong, you're amazing. You've helped me solve my problem." At this time, Tong Tong suddenly became shy. She lowered her head and stamped her foot. Then, she angrily said, "Brother, how can you kiss me? I'm ignoring you." Then, her body flashed and disappeared from my sight. She returned to the jade bracelet. However, at the moment she disappeared, Wei Samping's corpse suddenly stood up from the ground. He reached out his hand and pinched me. At the same time, I could see a trace of reproach on his dark face. This gave me a fright. His pupil's control over zombies wasn't any less than that of the corpse sect's people. However, the zombies' movements were a little scary, and it made my hair stand on end, making me feel very uncomfortable. Fortunately, Tong Tong wasn't stubborn. After pinching me, she didn't do anything else. However, her voice was still a little angry as she asked me what to do next. I asked her to control the zombie and carry the 10 corpses on the ground. Can you do it? Tong Tong didn't answer me. She directly commanded the zombie to carry the corpses on the ground. Then, she jumped twice at me, indicating that it was a piece of cake. Tong Tong's personality was much more cheerful than before. I smiled and praised her. Then, I took off all of Wei Samping's clothes and swapped with mine. Then, I asked Tong Tong to command the zombie to obediently follow behind me. We walked to the cave with the water source. At this time, everything was ready. I could use Yin energy to cover my face. At the same time, I used the dark green energy to cover my Tao energy to the early stage of the acupoint sealing realm. Tong Tong could also use her heavenly Yin energy to make Wei Samping's corpse show the aura of the middle stage of the acupoint sealing realm. At that time, even if we met people of the corpse Yin sect in the glory of knowledge realm, as long as they didn't check too carefully, they wouldn't find anything wrong. Of course, if we met people in the heavenly master realm, it would be a different story. The entrance to the cave didn't look far from us, but we had to walk for around 3 hours before we reached it. When I stood outside the cave, I could see that the river flowing out of the cave was extremely wide. It filled the entire entrance of the cave and extended to both sides. The river was even wider than the entrance of the cave. In this way, there was no path to enter or exit the cave. We could only rely on the boat. I was a little skeptical. According to Wei Samping's memory, every time we passed through this place, someone would come and pick us up. However, I had been standing here for a long time. How come I didn't see anything? While I was thinking, I heard an old man's voice. Kid from the Wei family, the time to hand over the corpses is today. It's the hour of the morning. If you miss the time, aren't you afraid of being punished by the masters in the corpse storage hall? I jumped in fright and hastily turned my head to look. I saw a skinny old man standing next to me with an oar. His pair of dim yellow eyes were staring at me. I recognized that this old man was only at the late stage of the dragon-seeking realm. He hadn't even broken through to the pressure point realm. However, I didn't know if it was an illusion, but I felt a threatening aura from his body. Wei Samping was an introverted person, but at the same time, he was a little arrogant. I dodged his gaze and stiffly replied, "I naturally understand." Heh. The skinny old man smiled and waved his hand to the side. Suddenly, a small boat appeared on the seemingly empty surface of the river. When he jumped onto the boat, he forced a smile and said, "If it wasn't because I had some friendship with your father in the past, this old man wouldn't have bothered to remind you." "Alright, quickly come up. The one on duty today is Lord Hu of the Corpse Storage Hall. You should think carefully about how to deal with him." I gloomily nodded and jumped onto the boat. Wei Samping's corpse also jumped onto the boat under Tong Tong's command. The small boat looked very unstable, but even with so many corpses on board, the boat still steadily floated without the slightest danger of capsizing. After we were seated, the skinny old man swung the oar in his hand, and the boat quickly moved towards the cave. After entering the cave, I looked around for a long time and was immediately astonished. This karst cave extended in all directions and had countless branches. Each branch was connected to a slightly smaller cave, and from these slightly smaller caves, countless more branches extended out. As the cycle continued, it was likely that the entire underground of the Taihang Mountains was filled with these large and small caves. Chapter 183. On the way here, the numerous and crisscrossing caves were already an eye-opener for me, but the hall in front of me was even more amazing. I grew up on the east side of the river, and the small hills in the village were the remnants of the Taihang Mountains. However, I had never thought that there would be such a mystical place hidden under the 800 miles of the Taihang Mountains. Aside from the huge purple trees, there was also a middle-aged man with a greenish-black complexion. His face was also shrouded in Yin energy, but I could vaguely see that he had a solemn expression. The people of the corpse sect had all of their Tao energy turn into Yin energy. As the saying goes, solitary Yin is unusual. It was very difficult for the Yin energy in one's body to completely stabilize. The higher one's cultivation base was, the more Yin energy they emitted. That was why Yin energy covered their faces. In fact, this kind of situation was very common. In reality, the village witches and gods who had passed or walked in the shadows often had Yin Qi lingering around them, and their faces were blurred. It was all for the same reason. Before I could react, the skinny boatman behind me whispered to me, "That's Darren Hu. You should go quickly. Don't make Darren Hu angry." After saying that, he didn't dare to say anything else and hurriedly drove the boat away. I pondered for a moment and slightly lowered my head. I quickly walked toward Darren Hu. While walking, I carefully asked Tong Tong to pour her heavenly Yin energy into one of the corpses. Tong Tong didn't know why, but she didn't ask and immediately did as I asked. When I arrived in front of Darren Hu, I lifted my head and saw that the Yin energy around Darren Hu was much thicker than mine. I couldn't see his realm, but I guessed he was at the glorious memory realm. Without waiting for me to speak, Darren Hu coldly said, "If you're late, you will be locked in the soul-devouring cave for 5 days. Put down the corpse you chose and go to the soul-devouring cave to receive your punishment." The skinny old man didn't say anything. This Darren Hu on duty didn't have a good temper. He didn't have the slightest intention of making an exception and directly told me to go and receive my punishment. Although I didn't know what the soul-devouring cave was, just from the name, I could tell that it was a place where one would lose a layer of skin after entering. I didn't move and quickly said, "Darren Hu, I came back late because..." Before I could finish my sentence, I was interrupted by Hu Darren. He stared at me coldly and said, "There is a reason, right? All right, I'll give you a chance to tell me your reason. If I can't accept it, then after you go to the soul-devouring cave, you don't have to come out again. How about it? Do you still want to tell me the reason?" My face darkened. Fortunately, I had made preparations beforehand. Otherwise, I would have been sentenced to life imprisonment as soon as I got in here without doing anything. I would have died a wrongful death. "Darren Hu, please take a look at this corpse." I didn't explain much and pointed at the corpse that Tong Tong had poured heavenly Yin energy into. Lord Hu didn't look at the corpse but at me. The corners of his mouth curled into a cold smile. Then, he turned to look at the corpse. A few seconds later, the smile on his face froze. He reached out and grabbed the corpse from the corpse puppet. After carefully placing it on the ground, he tore off the corpse bag. This was the corpse of a young woman. Although she had been dead for a long time, Wei Samping had already injected Yin Qi into the corpse before transporting it. As a result, the corpse was still in good condition, and one could even see a bit of charm. However, Darren Hu didn't pay attention to the corpse's appearance. He paid attention to Tong Tong's energy. Heavenly Yin energy was a special kind of Yin energy that belonged to a heavenly embryo. It was much purer and thicker than ordinary Yin energy. Although zombies weren't the same as ghosts, they both belonged to the Yin attribute. It was hard to say what kind of effect the heavenly Yin energy would have, but it would definitely surprise people. Looking at Darren Hu's expression, I knew I had made the right bet. After waiting for a few minutes, Lord Hu suddenly turned his head and asked hurriedly, "Where did you find this body? Were there any other corpses with similar energy nearby?" I shook my head and pretended to be puzzled. This corpse was provided by the crematorium. I saw a wisp of thick Yin energy on it, so I chose it. As for similar corpses, there was only this one in the cold storage room. There was no other corpse with similar energy. Darren Hu's face was also puzzled. After a long time, he lowered his head and muttered, "Could it be that this corpse naturally has Earth-level Yin energy? Heavenly Yin body?" After muttering for a long time, Darren Hu directly picked up the corpse and turned to leave. It seemed he wanted to go back and study it. I thought that he had forgotten about my punishment. Who would have thought that after walking a few steps, he would suddenly turn around? His face had returned to its previous solemn expression. He said to me, "No matter what the reason is, missing the time is missing the time. Since you found a good corpse to choose from, the punishment of 3 days will be changed to 1 day. You can go to the soul-devouring cave to receive your punishment." I was a little dumbfounded. I thought that I had done a meritorious service by finding a corpse, but I didn't expect that I would still be punished. The rules of the corpse sect were very strict. There was a clear boundary between the superiors and the subordinate. Since it was Darren whose order, I had to follow it unconditionally. Otherwise, it wouldn't just be a simple punishment. Feeling helpless, I got up and went to the other side of the cave. I followed the tunnel to the soul-devouring cave. The soul-devouring cave existed in Wei Sampeng's memory, but he had never been there before. He didn't know what was inside, only that it was very scary. In addition, although he didn't have the location of the corpse sect in his memory, he had the path to the sect. Otherwise, I would have been at a loss. Along the way, I passed by several large caves. While walking, I observed the surroundings. Soon, I had a general idea of the surrounding area. The place where the corpses of the corpse sect were stored was the corpse storage hall that the skinny boatman had mentioned to me. The cave that Lord who was in just now was also considered a part of the corpse storage hall. However, it was just a workplace and not a place to store corpses. The real warehouse for storing corpses was not far behind the cave, where there were several rows of warehouses. If my parents' corpses were really in the corpse sect, it was most likely to be in this corpse storage warehouse. Therefore, when I passed by that place, I deliberately slowed down and carefully sensed the aura of corpses. Unfortunately, there were a lot of people guarding that place. If I rashly used the ancestral seeking talisman, I would be easily discovered. I could only suppress this idea for the time being. I planned to find a time when there was no one around to try it. After firmly remembering this location, I continued to walk forward for a long time until I reached the location of the soul-devouring cave in my memory. I thought that this place was similar to a prison and that there would be a lot of people guarding it. However, I didn't expect that there was only a skinny old man sitting in a small cave. He was holding a small knife and was carving something that looked like a piece of wood. After seeing me, he didn't even bother to raise his head. He just sat there and pointed me in a random direction, telling me to go to the third room on the left. I nervously moved to the left and looked around. It was a place that looked like a winding corridor. There were several small caves on both sides that looked exactly the same. I guessed that this was the soul-devouring cave. Although the name sounded scary, it looked very ordinary. I couldn't see anything scary about it. Compared to the previous halls, it looked much warmer and more exquisite. I walked to the third room on the left and walked in. As soon as I got in, the thin stone door closed on its own. I frowned. It wasn't because something terrible had happened, but because I suddenly felt a strong yang energy. The walls of this stone room were releasing scorching yang energy that wrapped around my body. It was warm and comfortable. A strange thought popped up in my head. Could it be that this soul-devouring cave got its name because of this strong yang energy? It was possible. According to Wei Sampeng's memories, the people of the corpse sect had cultivated Tao energy since they were young. The technique they used was called the Yin refining technique. When their Tao energy advanced, it would immediately turn into Yin energy. After a long time, they didn't know what energy was and only knew how to cultivate Yin energy. Their souls had been nourished by Yin Qi all year round, so they had gradually become Yin Qi. As a result, when the people of the corpse sect walked into this small cave filled with Yang Qi, they would be surrounded by Yang Qi, and they would really feel the pain of their souls being devoured. After understanding the situation, I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. After entering the cave, the Yin energy in the corpse sect had made me feel stifled. I thought that I would have to suffer in this soul-devouring cave again, but it turned out to be a heavenly place. Bathing in the yang energy, I felt like I was soaking in a hot spring. I stretched my body and sat on the ground. I leaned against the wall and soon fell asleep. After killing Wei Samping and studying the corpse sex martial arts for the whole night, I was a little tired. Of course, since I was in an unknown place, I still had the basic vigilance. Before I went to sleep, I asked Tong Tong to help me watch the surroundings. If there was any change, she should wake me up immediately. It was just a subconscious action. However, not long after I fell asleep, Tong Tong's scream echoed in my head. She asked me to wake up quickly. What happened? You're tuning in to the Phoenix Nights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.